Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath in and let it out slowly, and let your shoulders come down from wherever they have been holding all day. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight, and nothing here that will ask anything of you. Tonight we are not going to visit a monastery infirmary with its long dim ward and its careful infirmera moving quietly among the beds. We are not going to walk inside the high walls of a Physic garden, laid out bed by bed for a physician's careful eye. We are not going to wander the pleasure gardens of a great castle, tended by a gardener answerable to a lord. Tonight we are going somewhere much smaller and much closer to the ground. We are going to stop at a low wooden gate that sags a little on its hinge, at the edge of an ordinary village, outside an ordinary cottage, and we are going to spend the whole of the night in the dooryard of a family who owned almost nothing, and who grew, in the small patch of earth around their door, very nearly everything they needed. This is the cottage garden. It is not grand, and it was never meant to be. There was no gardener but the goodwife of the house and her children, no glasshouse, no clipped hedge, no Latin labels on little painted stakes. There was a patch of trodden earth by the door, a bed or two along the sunniest wall, a scrap of ground by the wash house, a few feet of hedge that nobody had to plant, because it had simply grown there, thick with useful things, since before anyone living could remember. Every plant in this garden earned its place twice over. It went into the cooking pot, or the wash tub, or the mattress, or the broom, and only after that, when someone in the house had a headache, or a cough, or a cut that would not close, did anyone reach for it as a medicine at all. Nothing here was grown for physic alone. A family with one cow and a strip of rented field could not spare the ground for a plant that did nothing but heal. So the healing had to travel alongside the eating, the washing, the sweeping, and the keeping of bees, hidden inside the ordinary business of staying alive through another year. That is the quiet thread we are going to follow tonight, 100 times over. 100 small plants walked slowly around a single cottage plot, from the worn path at the door to the sunny bank by the wall, from the herb bed by the fire to the tangled hedge at the boundary, and at last to the rough waste ground by the Midden, where even the plants nobody had ever planted turned out to be worth something. Each one will be introduced the way the cottage family actually knew it, first as something eaten or worn, or burned or swept with, and only afterward as a cure. There is no need to remember any of it. There will be no test in the morning. You may simply let the names and the small stories drift past you, the way smoke drifts past a low doorway on a still evening, and let your own eyes close whenever they are ready to. Picture it now, if you like, before we start walking. The light is the soft gold of a long summer evening, though it could just as easily be any season, since a good cottage garden gave something useful in every one of them. The thatch above the door is a little green with moss. A thin curl of smoke rises from the chimney, where something is simmering slowly over the fire, herbs and all. The gate is only a few crossed sticks, tied with willow, and beyond it the path runs from the road straight to the door, worn pale and hard by generations of the same footsteps. Listen for a moment, too, if you like, to the small ordinary sounds that would have filled a place like this. A hen somewhere behind the cottage, settling with a soft, low mutter onto its roost. The faint, steady creak of the gate on its worn hinge, moved gently by an evening breeze. A pot lid shifting slightly as whatever simmers beneath it finds its own slow rhythm. Somewhere further off, a dog, comfortable rather than alarmed, giving one low, half-hearted bark before falling quiet again. None of it hurried, none of it urgent, just the ordinary overlapping, unremarkable sounds of an ordinary evening, drawing slowly toward its close. There is no need to imagine any particular family, with any particular names, though if it helps you settle, you might picture one anyway. A father who spends his days out in the strip fields beyond the hedge, coming home each evening with the same tired, honest ache in his back, and his hands smelling faintly of turned earth. A good wife who keeps this whole small plot in her head, almost without trying, who knows, without needing to look, exactly which bed holds the sage and which holds the valerian. An older woman, a grandmother perhaps, who still remembers a slightly different garden from her own girlhood, and who has quietly added one or two of her own favorite plants to this one over the years, and 2 or 3 children, who know the garden not as a list of remedies at all, but simply as the place where the ground is warm enough to sit on, where the strawberries hide, where the cat can usually be found flattening something fragrant in the sun. None of them thinks of this small plot as anything grand. It is simply the ground around their door, tended in whatever hour could be spared from the heavier work of feeding and clothing themselves, weeded a little on a Sunday afternoon, harvested a handful at a time whenever the pot or the medicine chest called for it, and yet walked slowly enough, as we are about to walk it. It turns out to hold nearly everything a family, without much else in the world, might need. We will begin gently at the gate itself and walk from there. Just inside the gate, where every foot that comes and goes must pass, the ground has been trodden so often and so long that almost nothing tall can grow there anymore. Almost nothing, except the first plant of the night. The first is chamomile. It is a low, mat-forming little plant, feathery-leaved, with small white daisy flowers no bigger than a fingernail, and it does not seem to mind being walked on at all. In fact, it seemed to prefer it. The cottage families of old England called this the path chamomile, or the sit-down chamomile, because a bed of it grown along the sunniest stretch of the path released its sweet apple, like scent whenever a foot pressed it down, so that the whole approach to the door smelled faintly, pleasantly, of ripening apples on a warm afternoon. It was never grown for medicine first. It was grown because a tired family, coming home from the field, liked to walk through something fragrant, and because a child could sit on a low bank of it in the evening without crushing anything that mattered. But of course, once it was there, growing thick and low and endlessly renewing itself underfoot, the cottage wife did not let it go to waste. A handful of the small flowers, pinched off on a dry morning and dried on a cloth in the sun, went into a pot of hot water on a restless evening for a fretful baby, or for an old grandmother who could not settle her stomach after a heavy supper. It was, in every sense, the gentlest plant in the whole garden, gentle enough that even the smallest child in the house was allowed to gather it, and gentle enough that we might let it be the very first stone on tonight's long, unhurried path, just past the trodden chamomile, where the path meets the low stone edging of the house wall. There grows something altogether stranger to look at. The second is houseleek, thick, fleshy, star-shaped rosettes of grey-green leaves, packed tightly together like a little rosette of grey roses, growing directly out of the thatch of the roof, or out of a crack between two stones on the wall, or in a cracked pot set deliberately on the windowsill. Cottage families planted house-leek on the roof itself, on purpose, tucked into the thatch above the door, because an old belief held that it protected the house from lightning and from fire, and so it earned its old country name, Welcome Home, or sometimes simply the roof plant. Whether or not it truly turned aside a lightning bolt, it certainly did something useful closer to the ground. Break open one of its thick, water-filled leaves, and a cool, slightly slimy juice runs out, and that juice, pressed straight onto a burn from the cooking fire, or a sting from a nettle in the vegetable bed, brought a small, immediate coolness that every cottage child came to know by heart. It needed no drying, no pot, no fire of its own. It simply sat on the roof, waiting, ready the moment somebody needed it, which is perhaps the most cottage garden virtue of all. Growing low along the same wall, in the thin soil that gathers in the cracks between the stones, is a small, fleshy leaved plant that most passers-by would never think to look at twice. The third is stonecrop. It has small, plump, almost bead-like leaves, and in high summer a haze of small yellow, star-shaped flowers that seem to glow along the top of an old wall in the evening light. It asked for nothing. No digging, no watering, no care of any kind, and that alone made it a cottage garden favorite, since it would grow contentedly on a roof ridge, a wall top, or a heap of broken stone, where nothing else would take hold. Like its cousin the houseleek, its thick leaves held a cool, faintly astringent juice, and a crushed handful was pressed onto small cuts, insect bites, and the raw, chafed skin that came from a long day's work in wet boots. Village children called it welcome home too, in some districts, or biting stonecrop for its faintly peppery bite, if chewed by accident. And it was one of those plants so ordinary, so entirely part of every old wall and roof, that nobody could quite remember a time before it grew there. At the very edge of the trodden path, where nobody deliberately sowed anything, a low, feathery leaved plant with small yellow button flowers had simply appeared 1 year and never left. The fourth is feverfew. It has a strong, faintly bitter, almost medicinal smell when the leaves are brushed, sharp enough that most animals left it alone, which is exactly why it was allowed to stay so close to the door. Cottage wives valued a plant that could look after itself, and feverfew, once it found a foothold near a doorway, seeded itself again every year without anyone lifting a finger. Its true use, discovered and passed down through generations of ordinary households long before any physician wrote it in a book, was for the head. A tea made from a few of the small, ferny leaves, or simply chewing 1 or 2 of the bitter leaves fresh from the plant, was the cottage remedy for the low, grinding headache that came after a day spent bent double over the harvest, or after too much smoke from a badly drawing chimney. Its old country name, featherfew or featherfew, has softened over the centuries into the name we still use for it today, but its place by cottage doors everywhere has hardly changed at all. Beside the wash trough, where the ground stays a little damp from spilled water, a tall, leafy plant with small pink flowers stood ready for a very particular kind of household work. The fifth is soapwort. Its narrow, pointed leaves, when bruised and worked with a little water in the hands, raised a soft, genuine lather, gentle enough to be trusted with the family's best linen, the christening gown, the one good shirt kept for market days and church, when the harsh lye soap made at home might have been too rough. Cottage wives grew a clump of it deliberately near the wash trough for exactly this purpose, and its old country name, Bouncing Bet or Fuller's Herb, remembers the same use among the men who cleaned newly woven cloth. But the same gentle, cleansing quality that made it kind to linen also made it kind to skin, and a weak infusion of the root was used to bathe stubborn skin troubles and old sores that resisted the household's other remedies, washed clean, gently, again and again, until they finally began to heal. Nearby, close enough to the door that its strong scent met visitors before they had even reached it, grew a wary, silver-leaved shrub kept trimmed low and neat. The sixth is southernwood. Its country name was Lad's Love, given for the old custom of a young man tucking a sprig of it into his buttonhole when he went courting, since its sharp, clean, faintly lemon scent was thought pleasing, and its evergreen constancy a small promise of faithfulness. But its scent had a harder working purpose too. Bundled and hung in the linen chest, or laid among stored winter clothes, it kept moths from the family's small store of good wool, at a time when a single moth-eaten coat could not simply be replaced. As a medicine it was a tonic herb, a few of its bitter leaves steeped to settle a sluggish stomach, or to bring back a flagging appetite after a long illness, taken the way one might take any bitter, strengthening draught, without ceremony, simply because the goodwife of the house knew it worked. Right against the doorstep itself, so close that anyone leaving the house brushed past it without thinking, grew a tough, ferny-leaved plant with flat clusters of small yellow buttons. The seventh, and the last of the plants that guard this threshold, is tansy. Its strong, camphor-like scent was itself a kind of household tool, since a few fresh sprigs strewn on the stone floor or laid inside the larder discouraged the flies that gathered so easily around a working kitchen in warm weather. At Easter, cottage households across England baked its young, finely chopped leaves into a tansy pudding or a tansy cake, eaten as a traditional spring tonic to clear away the sluggishness of a long winter indoors, a dish that was part food and part medicine, and never thought of as one more than the other. As a remedy proper, a very weak infusion of the leaves was given, carefully and sparingly, to children troubled by worms, a use so old and so widespread that almost every household in the countryside once knew the dose by heart, passed mother to daughter, without ever writing it down. And there, with the tansy nodding by the door behind us, the threshold is behind us too. We step properly into the garden now, past the trodden path, toward the small window of the kitchen itself, where a family, who owned almost nothing, still managed to keep a few of the freshest, most fragrant plants within easy reach of the cook's own hand. Just below the kitchen window, in a row of cracked pots and a narrow strip of warmed earth against the sunny wall, the household kept the herbs it reached for every single day, the ones too precious in daily use to be left out among the vegetables where a hard frost or a careless boot might take them. The eighth is parsley. Bright, crinkled, deep green leaves, growing in a low, dense clump that the cook could snip at with 2 fingers a dozen times a week without ever thinking twice about it. It went into nearly everything, chopped fine over a pottage, tucked around a roasting bird, scattered into a broth to freshen a dish that had simmered a little too long. Cottage households valued it as much for its iron-rich, faintly peppery freshness as for anything written in a physician's book, since a family that ate parsley through the growing season noticed, without ever needing to be told why, that they felt a little steadier through it. As a medicine it was chewed plain to sweeten a breath grown stale from onions and garlic, or brewed into a mild tea to ease water retention and gently settle the stomach, always in modest amounts, since even the most useful cottage herb was treated with a certain respect. Beside the parsley, in its own small clump, grew a plant with slender, hollow, grass-like leaves and a soft mauve pom-pom of a flower in early summer. The ninth is chives. The cook could take a small pair of scissors, snip a handful of the hollow green leaves close to the base, and have them back and regrown within the fortnight, which made them one of the most practical herbs in the whole garden for a household that needed a little onion flavor without pulling up a whole bulb from the vegetable bed. Chopped fine into butter, into a soft cheese, or simply strewn raw over bread and dripping, they gave an everyday meal a small, welcome lift. Medicinally, they were understood in the same rough way as the onion and the garlic they were related to be good for the blood and the appetite, a mild household tonic eaten so often, in such small quantities, that nobody thought of it as medicine at all until an illness came and the family noticed how much they had been leaning on it all along. A little further along the sill bed, low and woody-stemmed, its tiny leaves so fragrant that a single brushed sprig could be smelled across the whole garden, grew one of the most trusted plants any cottage possessed. The 10th is thyme. It asked for almost nothing, a sunny, well-drained corner, and no more water than the sky provided, and in return it gave the household a fragrant, faintly peppery herb for the pot all year round, since even in winter its low, woody growth held on to a little green and a little scent beneath the frost. It went into every kind of stewed meat and every kind of pottage, and a sprig of it, tied into a small bundle with other kitchen herbs, a bundle that later cooks would come to call a bouquet garni, was lifted whole from the pot before serving, its work quietly done. As a medicine, a strong tea made from its leaves was the cottage remedy of choice for a cough that had settled deep in the chest, and a wash made from the same tea was used on small wounds, since its strong scent was long trusted, correctly as it turned out, to keep a cut from turning bad. Its old name gave courage its very word, thyme once carried by knights as a mark of valor, though in the cottage garden its courage was a smaller, homelier thing, simply the courage to face another cold night with a warm, well-seasoned supper inside you. Next to the thyme, softer leaved and a little taller, its small purple flowers gathered in neat rounded knots, grew a herb the household kept especially for the colder months. The 11th is sweet marjoram. Its warm, sweet, faintly resinous scent made it a favorite for flavoring the heavier dishes of autumn and winter, the long-simmered stews of root vegetables, and whatever meat the family could spare, and a pinch of the dried leaf, rubbed between the fingers, could lift a plain pottage into something the whole table looked forward to. As a household remedy, it followed its scent closely. A tea made from the leaves eased a troubled digestion after a heavy meal, and a small pillow of the dried herb tucked under the head of someone with a persistent cold was said to ease the stuffiness of the chest and clear the passages enough to let a weary person finally sleep. Cottage grandmothers kept a store of it dried and set by every autumn, precisely so that the family would never be without it through the long, coughing months of winter. Beside the marjoram, low and grey-green, and faintly resinous itself, grew a smaller, hardier cousin, tougher against frost and drought alike. The 12th is summer savoury. It was the herb the cottage cook reached, for whenever the household's small store of dried beans came to the pot, since a sprig of savoury cooked in with the beans was long known to make them easier on the stomach and to soften the discomfort that a heavy bean pottage could otherwise bring. That single, practical kitchen habit, tested and confirmed across countless suppers, made it into a medicine in its own right, brewed alone into a warming tea for wind and stomach trouble, even when no beans were anywhere near the pot. Bees loved its small pale flowers nearly as much as the cook loved its flavor, and in high summer the whole low bed of it hummed quietly through the warm afternoons, doing its own small, steady work for the hive as well as for the household. Where the sill bed gave way to slightly damper, shadier ground beneath the eaves, a broad-leaved plant with a sharp, lemon-sour bite grew in a thick, generous clump. The 13th is sorrel. Its arrow-shaped leaves, torn and added raw to a salad or cooked briefly down into a bright, tart green sauce, gave the cottage table something sharp and fresh at a time of year, in high summer, when appetites could grow heavy and dull. That same sharp, cooling quality made it valued as a remedy for a fever. A few of the fresh leaves chewed slowly or steeped into a mild drink to bring down a hot, uncomfortable heat and to ease a parched, uneasy mouth. Long before anyone in a cottage had ever heard the word for it, families who ate sorrel through the growing season were quietly taking in a good deal of what we would now call vitamin C, at exactly the season when their winter stores of it had long since run dry, and their bodies, without any book to explain why, simply felt the better for it. And last in this small window bed, feathery and delicate, its lacy leaves closer in look to a fern than to any of its sturdier neighbors, grew a herb prized above all for its gentleness. The 14th is chervil. It had a soft, faintly aniseed sweetness, far more delicate than parsley, and it was scattered fresh over a dish only at the very last moment, since its flavor faded quickly once cooked. A small extravagance of timing that even the busiest cottage cook found worth the trouble on a good day. As a spring tonic, it was valued much like sorrel, a mild, blood-cleansing herb eaten fresh after the long, vegetable-starved months of winter, believed to sharpen a sluggish appetite and lift a heaviness that seemed to settle into the whole household by the end of a hard, cold season. Delicate as it looked, it reseeded itself readily in the loose soil beneath the window, so that a family needed only to let a few plants run to seed each year to keep the whole small bed replenished, gently, without any real effort at all. With the window bed behind us now, take a moment, if you like, to picture the whole small sill again, the cracked pots warmed by the afternoon sun, the low hum of an early bee investigating the chives, the smell of thyme and parsley drifting faintly through an open shutter. There is no need to hold on to any of it. It will still be there, quietly, whether you remember it or not, since none of this depends on your remembering. The ground beneath our feet grows a little richer now, a little more deliberately turned and tended. the soil darker and heavier, where years of ash and old manure have been worked patiently into it, as we come to the largest and busiest bed in the whole garden, the one kept nearest the cooking fire itself. This is the pot, herb bed, dug a little deeper than the rest, manured a little more generously, because the plants that grew here were needed almost every day of the year, rain or shine, and a family could not afford to let this particular bed fail. The 15th is sage. Broad, soft, grey-green leaves with a texture almost like felt, growing into a low, spreading bush that lasted for years without needing to be replanted. A rare and valuable trait in a garden, where most things had to be sown afresh each spring. It went into the pot with the fattiest cuts of meat, since it's strong. Slightly bitter flavor cut through richness and made a heavy dish easier to sit with afterward, a piece of kitchen wisdom the cottage cook understood long before anyone could explain the reason for it. Its old name comes from the same root as the word for wisdom, and a well-known old country saying asked why a person should die while sage grows in the garden, since it was trusted, above almost every other plant in the whole plot, as a genuine cure-all. A strong tea of sage leaves, gargled slowly, eased a sore throat better than almost anything else the household possessed, and a weaker infusion was drunk to settle the stomach and to calm the small fevers that moved so often through a house full of children. Close beside the sage, upright and woody and evergreen, even through the hardest winter, grew a narrow-leaved shrub whose scent seemed to fill the whole bed on its own. The 16th is rosemary. It kept its dark, needle-like leaves green through every season, a small, steady comfort to look at on a bare grey day in February when almost nothing else in the garden showed any colour at all. The cook prized it for roasting meats and for flavouring the bread baked once a week in the household's shared village oven, its sharp, resinous scent filling the kitchen and clinging pleasantly to hands and clothes for hours afterward. As a remedy it was rubbed, crushed in a little oil, into an aching joint after a long day's labour in the field, and a tea made from its leaves was taken and believed with real conviction to sharpen a failing memory, a use so old and so widely trusted that a sprig of rosemary was carried at weddings for remembrance and laid at burials for the very same reason. Its name has nothing to do with any rose at all, but comes instead from words meaning dew of the sea, a small poetic memory of the coastal hillsides where it first grew wild, long before it ever found its way into a cottage garden bed. Beside the rosemary, softer and greener, its leaves giving off a cool, refreshing scent the moment they were brushed, grew one of the most useful herbs any household could keep. The 17th is spearmint. It spread eagerly through the bed, sending out new shoots in every direction, so eagerly that most cottage gardeners learned to grow it in an old cracked pot sunk into the ground, just to keep it from taking over its quieter neighbours entirely. That same vigour meant a family was never without it, a handful of fresh leaves, ready at any moment for a simple tea, or for flavouring a sauce served alongside the season's young vegetables. As a medicine, it was the household's everyday answer to an upset stomach, a mild, pleasant tea that settled a child's discomfort after too many green apples, or eased the heaviness of a meal that had sat uneasily after a long day. It was gentle enough to be given to almost anyone in the house, from the youngest child to the oldest grandparent, and trusted enough that a cottage without at least one patch of mint somewhere in its garden was almost impossible to imagine. At the sunniest edge of the pot, herb bed, tall and grey-leaved, its fine feathery foliage catching the light, grew a plant valued as much for its seed as for its leaf. The 18th is fennel. Its aniseed sweet leaves were chopped into fish dishes and into the sauces served alongside them, and its small ridged seeds, gathered and dried at the end of summer, were kept in a jar near the hearth for flavouring bread and for chewing plain after a meal to freshen the mouth. As a remedy, it was one of the gentlest in the whole garden, a weak infusion of the crushed seeds, given to a colicky infant to ease the wind, that kept the whole household awake through the night. A dose so old and so reliable that it survived, almost unchanged, for many centuries afterward under nearly the same name. The seeds were also chewed plain, a pinch at a time, to settle an uneasy stomach after a heavy meal, and a wash made from the leaves was used to soothe tired, strained eyes after a long day spent working by poor candlelight. Beside the fennel, feathery leaved in a similar way, but finer still, its scent sharper and more distinctive, grew a herb the household could hardly have kept a kitchen without. The 19th is dill. Its fine, thread-like leaves were chopped fresh into sauces and into the brine used for pickling the last of the season's cucumbers and small green vegetables, a preserving trick that let a family taste a little of summer, even in the depths of a hard winter. Its seeds, like fennels, were the herb's true medicinal treasure, steeped into a mild water and given, drop by careful drop, to a fussy, colicky baby, so often and so reliably that the very name for this remedy, dill water, survived in ordinary households for centuries after the cottage gardens that first grew it had long since vanished. Chewed plain, the seeds were also believed to sweeten a sour stomach and to help the whole family settle after a rich or hurried meal. One more small, quiet piece of everyday medicine, hiding inside an everyday flavoring. At the back of the bed, tall and celery-scented, its hollow stems thick enough to bend without breaking, grew a plant with an old and rather tender reputation. The 20th is love age. Every part of it found its way into the kitchen, the leaves chopped into soups and stews for a deep, savory flavor, not unlike celery, but stronger, the hollow stems sometimes candied as a small sweet treat. The roots occasionally added to a long simmered pottage for their own particular richness. Its old country name was simply the love herb, and a sprig it was sometimes tucked, half in jest and half in earnest hope, into the clothing of someone hoping to be noticed by a sweetheart at a village dance. Set more seriously to work, a bath scented with its leaves and roots was used to ease the ache of tired limbs and to freshen the whole body after a long spell of hard labor, and a tea made from the root was given for digestive troubles, trusted for its strong, warming, faintly bitter character. And at the very corner of the pot, herb bed, where a little more shelter from the wind allowed a small tree to establish itself, grew the one plant in this whole bed that was not an annual or a low perennial, but something altogether more permanent. The 21st is bay laurel. It grew slowly into a small, dense, evergreen tree, trimmed low and kept close to the wall for shelter, and it gave the household glossy, aromatic leaves all year round, a rare gift in a garden where so much else died back with the first hard frost. A single leaf, tucked into a simmering pot of beans or a long cooked stew, gave the whole dish a deep, rounded flavor that no other herb in the bed could quite match, and a leaf or two tucked into the flour bin was trusted, correctly as it turned out, to discourage the small weevils that so often plagued a household's precious winter store of grain. As a remedy, its use was gentler and less frequent than most of its neighbors, a warm infusion of the leaves taken occasionally to ease a troubled stomach, but its steady, evergreen presence at the corner of the bed, unbothered by frost or drought, made it feel, to every generation of the family that tended it, like the quiet, dependable elder of the whole herb bed. Just past the bay tree, the ground dips slightly toward a low, flat stone set before a door of its own, worn smooth and a little slick where the household did its heaviest, wettest work. This is the wash house step, and the small bed of plants gathered around it were kept, almost without exception, for the mending of small hurts. The 22nd is horseradish. Its broad, dark green leaves rose from a thick, pale, deeply buried root that the cook dug only rarely, since a single root, grated fine, gave off a sharp, tear-bringing heat strong enough to season a whole winter's worth of meals. Grated and mixed with a little cream or vinegar, it accompanied the salted, preserved meats that carried a family through the leanest months, cutting through their heaviness with its own fierce bite. As a remedy, that same fierce heat was put to careful use, a small grated portion mixed into a poultice and applied, briefly and with respect, to the chest for a deep, stubborn cough, or rubbed gently onto chilblained fingers and toes on the coldest winter mornings, the sharp warmth of the root working its way slowly into skin gone numb and aching from the cold. Right beside the wash trough itself, sprawling low with broad, ribbed, slightly hairy leaves and small clusters of pale purple bell-shaped flowers, grew perhaps the single most valued healing plant in the entire cottage garden. The 23rd is comfrey. Its old country name, knitbone, tells the whole of its reputation in 2 words, since a poultice made from its crushed leaves and root, bound firmly over a sprain or a suspected break, was trusted, generation after generation, to speed the mending of bone and muscle alike. It grew so easily in such damp, unpromising ground that almost every cottage garden kept a generous clump of it somewhere near the wash house, ready at a moment's notice for the household's next fall from a hayloft or wrench of an ankle on an uneven path. Beyond its famous use on bones, a poultice of the same broad leaves was laid over bruises, swellings, and old wounds slow to close, and its remarkable, almost sticky healing power was so widely trusted across the whole countryside that families, without a single other named remedy in the house, could still very often be found with a patch of comfrey growing somewhere close at hand, along the damp edge of the same bed, tall, bristling with fine stinging hairs that every child in the household learned to avoid the hard way, grew a plant most people today would call nothing more than a weed. The 24th is nettle. Its sting alone would have been reason enough for most families to pull it out and be done with it. But the cottage garden kept it deliberately, because the very same young leaves that stung so sharply raw became, once cooked, one of the richest and most valued greens of the whole early spring, a soup or pottage eaten eagerly, after a long winter with almost no fresh vegetables at all. As a medicine, it was the great spring tonic of the whole countryside, a strong tea drunk through the early weeks of the growing season to cleanse and strengthen the blood after months of salted, preserved food. Stranger still, and yet widely practiced. The sting itself was sometimes put to deliberate use, a handful of fresh nettles pressed against a joint stiff and aching with rheumatism, on the belief, not entirely without merit, that the sharp sting stirred the blood and eased a deeper, duller pain. Beside the nettle, tall and stately, its hollow stems thick as a thumb and its leaves broad and deeply divided, grew a plant reserved for the more serious troubles of the household. The 25th is Angelica. Its young stems, cut in late spring, were candied in sugar syrup, a small, treasured sweetness in a household that otherwise saw very little sugar of any kind, and the candied stems kept for months, brought out on feast days or given to a sick child as both treat and comfort together. Its old name comes from a belief that it was revealed by an angel as a protection against plague and pestilence. And though the great plagues themselves were far beyond any cottage remedy, a warming tea made from its root was trusted through every lesser fever and every difficult, congested winter chest that passed through the house. Every part of the plant carried a strong, warm, slightly musky scent, and even its dried root, kept in the still room through the colder months, was said to fill a whole room with a comforting fragrance the moment it was opened. Nearer the step itself, low and cheerful, its bright orange flowers open even on a dull, overcast day, grew a plant so common in cottage gardens across the whole countryside that it was hardly thought of as anything special at all. The 26th is Calendula. Its petals, plucked fresh through the whole of a long summer, were dropped into the pot to color a plain pottage or a dish of eggs a rich, buttery yellow at a time when true saffron was far beyond any cottage family's means, earning it the old country name, poor man's saffron, in more than one village. Beyond the kitchen, its petals were used to color butter and soft cheese, the same warm gold, a small, cheap trick that made a plain larder look a little richer than it truly was. As a remedy, its gentlest and most trusted use was as a salve. The petals steeped slowly in warmed fat or oil until their color and their goodness passed into it, then cooled and kept in a small pot for dressing cuts, scrapes, and the raw, chapped skin that came with every hard winter, a salve so mild that it was used, without any hesitation at all, on the smallest children in the house. And last on the house step, low and modest, its small hooded purple flowers, easily overlooked among its taller neighbors, grew a plant whose very name announced exactly what it was for. The 27th is Woundwort. Its soft, downy leaves, when crushed, released a faint, not unpleasant scent, and bound directly over a fresh cut or scrape, they were trusted to draw the wound closed and to keep it from turning bad, a use so old and so central to the plant's whole identity that its common name carried the purpose right inside it, plain for anyone to understand without a single word of explanation needed. Cottage households valued a plant like this precisely because it demanded so little in return, growing readily in the rough, half-shaded ground near the wash house, where almost nothing more delicate would have survived at all. Always there, always ready. The quiet last word of the wash house step before the garden opens out toward brighter, sunnier ground. Just beyond the wash house step, pause a moment with me on the worn flat stone, and let your shoulders settle a little further than they already have. We are not even a third of the way through the garden yet, and that is exactly as it should be. There is a whole quiet evening ahead of us, and nothing at all that needs to be finished tonight. The light broadens now, warm and unhurried, and a low humming fills the afternoon air, drawing us toward the part of the garden the household kept not for themselves at all, but for the bees. This is the bee border, a narrow strip of the sunniest ground in the whole plot, kept deliberately close to the row of straw skeps at the bottom of the garden. Because a cottage family that kept bees understood, long before any book of natural history explained the reason, that the hive needed flowers just as surely as the family needed the hive. The 28th is borage. Tall and bristly, its broad leaves rough to the touch, it produced through the whole of the summer a steady, generous show of small, star-shaped blue flowers that the bees visited so constantly the whole plant seemed to hum on its own. Its leaves, tasting faintly and pleasantly of cucumber, were chopped into salads and steeped in the cool drinks served on the rare hot afternoons of an English summer, and its flowers were sometimes frozen into little blocks of ice for the same purpose, a small, cheerful luxury from a family with almost none. As a remedy, it was known across the whole countryside as the herb that brought courage, a warm infusion of the leaves given to someone facing a hard task or a long illness, on the old belief, sincerely held, that the plant's own bright cheerfulness could somehow be passed along to the person who drank it. Close beside the borage, low and soft-leaved, with small, drooping, star-shaped flowers in a gentle blue, grew a plant whose very name was borrowed from the bee itself. The 29th is lemon balm. Its Latin name, Melissa, means simply the bee, since beekeeping households across Europe rubbed the fresh crushed leaves inside a new straw skep before a swarm was settled into it, on the trusted belief that the lemon sweet scent would help the bees feel at home in their new hive. Beyond the bee garden, its fresh leaves gave a bright, lemon-like lift to a cup of hot water on an evening the family could not afford a true import of tea, and a few leaves crushed into a jug of small beer freshened the whole drink pleasantly. Medicinally, it was the great calmer of the whole garden, a warm tea taken to settle a racing heart, to ease the low, nagging worry of a hard season, and to help an anxious mind finally quiet enough for sleep. A gentle, trusted remedy still known by nearly the same reputation today. Beside the lemon balm, upright and narrow-leaved, with spikes of small blue flowers the bees seemed unable to pass by, grew a herb whose reputation for cleanliness reached back further than almost anything else in the garden. The 30th is hyssop. Its name appears in old religious writing as a herb of purification, tied with a bundle of other twigs and used to sprinkle water in a cleansing ritual, and that old, half-sacred reputation followed it quietly into the cottage garden for centuries afterward. In the kitchen its strong, faintly minty, faintly bitter leaves flavored the heavier stewed meats and the thick soups of a cold season, cutting through their richness in much the same way sage did nearby. As a remedy, a tea of its leaves was the household's trusted answer to a chest gone tight and wheezy with a stubborn cough, taken warm, a spoonful at a time, until the tightness eased and the breath came easier again. Beside the hyssop, low and grey-green, its leaves giving off a strong, slightly musky scent whenever it was brushed, grew a plant that drew one particular visitor above all others. The 31st is catmint. Every cat within reach of the garden seemed to find it eventually, rolling in its low leaves with an enthusiasm no other plant in the whole plot ever provoked. And cottage households tolerated the resulting flattened patch good-naturedly, since a contented cat kept the mice from the grain store far better than any other remedy the garden could offer. For the family itself, rather than the cat, its leaves were brewed into a mild, calming tea, given especially to a fretful, colicky infant, gentle enough to be trusted with the very youngest member of the household, and warming enough, taken by an adult on a cold evening, to bring on an easy, early sleep. At the sunniest, most sheltered corner of the whole bee border, low and grey-leaved, its narrow spikes of small purple flowers, standing straight and proud through the whole of high summer, grew perhaps the single most fragrant plant in the entire garden. The 32nd is lavender. Its scent alone was worth the ground it grew in, a clean, sweet, unmistakable fragrance that clung to anything laid near it. And cottage households dried whole bundles of the flower, spikes each summer to tuck among stored linen, keeping the family's small store of good cloth smelling fresh through months in a closed wooden chest. The bees worked its spikes from dawn until the light failed, and a well-grown lavender plant could seem, on a still July afternoon, to be quietly vibrating with their steady attention. As a remedy, a few of the dried flowers, soon into a small linen pillow, eased a restless head into an easier sleep, and a weak infusion of the flowers was dabbed onto a minor burn or insect sting, its scent alone bringing a kind of calm that seemed to work on the mind just as surely as its milder properties worked on the skin. Beside the lavender, taller and coarser leaved, with soft purple flowers gathered up a tall, square stem, grew a herb whose old reputation had less to do with fragrance and more to do with sheer trusted strength. The 33rd is wood betony. It was gathered in some districts with something close to ceremony and an old country. Rhyme urged anyone who wanted good health to sell their coat and buy bitony, a piece of folk wisdom that speaks plainly to how highly this ordinary-looking plant was once regarded. Cottage households drank a tea of its leaves for almost any lingering complaint that resisted their other remedies. A headache that would not lift, a general low weariness that lingered through a whole hard season, and it was also, in gentler quantities, valued as a mild protective charm, planted deliberately near a doorway or churchyard wall in the belief that its old strength kept away more than ordinary illness. The bees visited its spikes readily enough, though never with quite the same devotion they gave the lavender close by. And last in the bee border, its broad, wrinkled, soft grey-green leaves rising into a tall stem of vivid blue and white flowers, grew a plant valued above all for its use on one small, precious part of the body. The 34th is clary sage. Its old country name, clear eye, describes its most trusted household use directly, a mild infusion made from its small, mucilaginous seeds soaked in water until they formed a soft, soothing gel, then used to bathe a sore, tired, or irritated eye after a long day spent working by poor light or in a smoke-filled kitchen. Its warm, faintly musky scent, close cousin to the true sage growing back in the pot herb bed, made it a useful addition to a heavier autumn dish when a little variety was welcome. And its tall flower spikes, like nearly everything else along this whole sunny border, kept the bees busy from the earliest days of summer until the last warm afternoons of early autumn had finally faded. Past the last blue spike of clary sage, the bee border gives way to neat, straight rows, and the low hum of the hive fades behind us as we come to the household's vegetable patch, where medicine had learned, out of sheer necessity, to hide in plain sight among the family's daily food. This is the Physic corner of the vegetable patch, and every plant that grew here first and foremost fed the family through a long, hard year, its medicine a quiet second use tucked inside a much larger, more urgent purpose. The 35th is garlic. Planted in a long, careful row and left largely to itself through the growing season, it produced, come late summer, firm white bulbs that were pulled, plaited, and hung to dry in ropes from the kitchen rafters, a store meant to last the household through the whole of the coming winter. It flavored nearly every savory dish the cottage kitchen produced, and beyond the kitchen it carried a reputation, held with real conviction across the whole of the countryside, as a protection against illness of almost every kind. A single clove eaten raw and fasting believed to guard the eater through a season when sickness moved freely from house to house. As a direct remedy, a crushed clove, mixed into warmed fat, was rubbed onto the chest for a deep, stubborn cough, and a clove was sometimes worn, strung on a cord about the neck of a child, in the earnest hope of keeping fever and infection away entirely. Beside the garlic, in its own long row, grew a plant whose bulbs formed the very foundation of nearly every cottage meal. The 36 is onion. It was, without much competition, the single most used vegetable in the whole garden, chopped into almost every pottage and stew the household cooked through the entire year, and a good store of it, kept dry and cool through the winter, was considered as essential to the family's survival as the grain itself. Its medicinal reputation was every bit as strong as garlic's, a slice of raw onion bound directly over an earache, a syrup made by slowly cooking sliced onion with a little honey given for a persistent cough, and a cut onion left standing in a sick room, on an old belief held across many households to draw the illness out of the air itself. Chopping it brought tears to even the most practical cottage cook, a small, everyday discomfort so familiar that nobody thought to complain about it at all. Beside the onion, tall and blue-green leaved, with a thick white stem that thickened slowly through the growing season, grew a vegetable especially valued in the poorer, damper parts of the countryside. The 37th is leek. It grew where onions sometimes struggled, in heavier, wetter ground, and a good row of leeks, harvested through the whole autumn and winter, gave the household a reliable green vegetable at a time of year when almost nothing else fresh remained in the garden at all. Slow cooked into a thick, warming broth, often with little more than a bone and a few dried herbs alongside it, leeks fed a family through the hardest, hungriest stretch of the year, and that same broth, given warm to someone with a chest cold or a lingering cough, was trusted as a genuine remedy in its own right, gentle enough for the sick and the very old to take when almost nothing else would sit easily. Beside the leek, low and bushy, its small four-petaled yellow flowers, giving way to thin seed pods through the summer, grew a plant whose seed carried far more heat than its size would ever suggest. The 38th is mustard. Its small seeds, gathered and ground between two stones, were mixed with a little water into a sharp, pungent paste, used sparingly to season the family's plainer dishes, and in somewhat larger quantity, spread onto a cloth and bound over the chest as a warming plaster for a deep winter cough or a stiff, aching back. That same fierce, Blood-stirring heat made a mustard bath. The ground seed stirred into warm water for the feet. A trusted household remedy for chilblains and for the deep, bone-level chill that came after a day spent working outside in freezing weather. It was used with real respect, since too strong or too long an application could raise a blister as easily as it could ease an ache. A small lesson every cottage child eventually learned for themselves. Beside the mustard, low and broad-leaved, forming a tight, pale green head through the cooler months, grew one of the most humble and most essential vegetables in the whole garden. The 39th is cabbage. It fed the household through the whole of the cold season, boiled into soups and pottages, salted down into a preserve that would keep for months in a cold larder. A plain, unglamorous vegetable that nonetheless stood between many a poor family and real hunger through a hard winter. Its outer leaves, warmed briefly by the fire until soft and pliable, were laid directly over a sore chest, an aching joint, or even, among nursing mothers, over a tender, overfull breast, a remedy so simple and so widely used across the whole countryside that it survived, almost unchanged, into households many centuries later who had long forgotten where the habit first began. Beside the cabbage, its pale, rounded root swelling just beneath the soil, its leafy green top standing well above it, grew a vegetable the household could pull nearly all winter long. The 40th is turnip, boiled soft and mashed, with a little of the household's precious butter, or added whole to a long-simmered stew. It was one of the most reliable sources of food a cottage family possessed, through the leanest stretch of the calendar, hardy enough to survive being left in the ground through all but the very worst frosts. Baked slowly with a little honey drizzled over it, it became a genuine remedy for a stubborn cough, softened and sweetened, just enough to be given even to a sick child who had refused every other food and every other medicine offered that day, a small comfort in a hard season that asked for very little and gave back a great deal. And last in the Physic corner of the vegetable patch, its bright orange root buried deep in the loosest soil the family could manage, its feathery green top waving gently above the ground, grew a vegetable whose reputation only grew stronger with each passing generation. The 41st is carrot, pulled fresh through the summer and stored carefully in dry sand through the winter. It sweetened a plain pottage and gave the household one of its few genuinely sweet tastes in a diet otherwise built almost entirely around grain, root, and whatever meat could occasionally be spared. Grated and applied as a poultice, it was trusted to draw and cleanse a slow-healing wound or a stubborn old ulcer, and eaten regularly through the growing season. It was believed, with a conviction that later generations would find at least partly justified, to keep the eyes strong and clear through the whole of a long working life spent squinting by firelight and candle. Past the last row of carrots, let yourself rest for a moment in the plainness of what we have just walked through: garlic and onion, and leek and cabbage and turnip and carrot, none of it remarkable to look at, all of it, in its own quiet way, keeping a whole household alive and a little steadier through every hard season it faced. There is a certain comfort in the ordinary, in a plant that never asked to be admired and simply did its work year after year without complaint. The neat lines of the vegetable patch loosen now and finally give way altogether, and the garden's tended order dissolves into the tangled, thorny boundary that marks the very edge of the family's small plot. This is the hedge and the gate, and unlike almost everything we have walked past so far, nobody in the household ever planted a single stem of it. It simply grew, thick and thorny and generous, along the boundary of the plot, and the family learned, over generations, to treat it not as a wild nuisance to be cleared, but as a second garden entirely, a wild larder that asked for nothing and gave back a great deal. The 42nd is elder. It grew into a small, many-stemmed tree at the corner of the hedge, and it gave the household two entirely different gifts in two different seasons. In late spring its broad, flat heads of small cream flowers were dipped in a light batter and fried, or steeped into a cordial sweetened with whatever honey could be spared, a fragrant, muscat-scented treat that marked the true arrival of summer for every child in the house. Come autumn, its heavy clusters of small dark berries were cooked down into a thick, dark syrup, kept through the winter as the household's first and most trusted defense against the coughs and colds that swept through every cottage once the cold weather set in. An old country saying warned against ever burning elder wood on the household fire for fear of ill luck, a small superstition that meant the tree was left standing at the hedge, undisturbed, for as long as anyone in the family could remember. Beside the elder, gnarled and dense, its branches studded with sharp thorns, and its clusters of small white flowers giving way to dark red berries by autumn, grew a tree the whole countryside once regarded as a boundary marker as much as a plant. The 43rd is hawthorn. Its young spring leaves, mild and slightly nutty, were sometimes eaten straight from the hedge by children on their way to and from the fields, earning the old country name bread and cheese in more than one district. Its dense, thorny growth made it the natural choice for any hedge meant to keep livestock in and wandering animals out, a living fence that needed no mending the way a wooden one so often did. Its dark autumn berries, called haws, were cooked down into a jelly, and a tea made from the same berries was given, gently and over a long period, to an older member of the household whose heart had grown tired and uneven with age. A slow, patient remedy for a slow, patient trouble. Twined through the same stretch of hedge, its thorny, arching stems reaching up through the hawthorn's own branches, grew a wild rose whose true value lay not in its flower, but in what followed it. The 44th is dog rose. Its pale pink flowers, blooming briefly through early summer, gave way in autumn to firm, bright red hips, gathered by the whole family in a single busy afternoon and cooked down slowly into a syrup that carried the household's single richest source of that bright, sharp freshness we now call vitamin C through the entire winter, at a time when no orange or lemon had any hope of reaching a poor rural cottage. A spoonful of rosy hip syrup, given daily through the coldest months, was one of the few remedies in the whole garden given not because someone was already ill, but simply to keep the whole family well through a season that tested everybody's strength. The thorns that guarded it so fiercely meant the harvest always came at the cost of a few small scratches, a fair trade the family made willingly, year after year. Lower down, tangled thickly through the base of the hedge, its long, arching, thorny canes rooting wherever their tips touched the ground, grew a plant that spread almost faster than the family could use it. The 45th is bramble. Its dark, sweet berries, gathered through the last warm weeks of late summer, were eaten fresh, baked into whatever pastry the household's flour store allowed, and preserved, when sugar could be spared, into a jam that brightened many a plain winter meal. Its leaves, less celebrated but no less useful, were dried and steeped into a strong, astringent tea, the cottage remedy of choice for the loose, uneasy stomach that so often followed eating fruit not quite ripe enough, or water not quite clean enough. Children who ventured too eagerly into the thicket after the last, sweetest berries at the very top of the bramble usually came away with a scratch or two for their trouble, one more small, familiar cost of a wild harvest freely given. Climbing up through the highest branches of the hedge, its trumpet-shaped, richly fragrant flowers opening wide in the cool of a summer evening, grew a plant valued for its scent alone as much as for anything else it offered. The 46th is honeysuckle. Its sweet, heavy perfume filled the whole garden after sunset, drawing moths through the dusk in the same steady way the bee border drew bees through the day. And cottage families let it climb freely through the hedge, and sometimes right up over the cottage door itself, simply for the pleasure of that evening, scent drifting in through an open window. As a remedy, a syrup made from its flowers was given, sparingly, for a persistent cough, and its leaves, steeped into a mild wash, were used on minor skin troubles. Though the plant was always treated with a certain caution, since its bright, tempting berries were known to be unsafe to eat, and every household made sure its children understood the difference clearly. Low along the very base of the hedge, its small white flowers giving way to tiny, intensely flavored red berries, almost too small for a child's smallest finger, grew a plant whose fruit was gone from the plate almost as soon as it was picked. The 47th is wild strawberry. Its berries, sweeter by far than anything the family could grow deliberately, were eaten straight from the plant on a warm afternoon. A small, fleeting treat gone in a single mouthful, far too precious and far too scarce to ever make it as far as the kitchen. Its leaves, gathered in greater quantity and dried through the summer, were steeped into a mild, pleasant tea, given for a mild stomach upset and, among the household's older women, trusted as a gentle tonic through the changes that came with age. The plant asked for nothing at all, spreading quietly along the shaded base of the hedge, content with far less sun and far less soil than almost anything else in the garden required. And last along this wild boundary, dense and thorny beyond even the hawthorn, its small white blossoms among the very first to open each spring, grew a tree whose dark, bitter fruit was almost never eaten fresh. The 48th is sloe. Also called blackthorn, it produced small, deep blue black fruits in autumn, so fiercely sour and puckering straight from the branch that no household ever tried to eat them plain, though after the first hard frost of the season softened their bitterness a little. They were sometimes cooked into a sharp, dark preserve, its thorns longer and harder even than the hawthorns, made a section of blackthorn hedge nearly impossible for any animal, wild or domestic, to push through, a natural fortification the family relied on more than any fence they could have built themselves. A bark and twig tea, though used sparingly given its strong, astringent bite, was taken occasionally for a troubled stomach, one of the sharper, harder-edged remedies in the whole garden, fitting for a tree that had earned its place at the very edge of the plot through sheer stubborn toughness. Past the thorny gate, where the ground dips low and stays damp long after the rest of the garden has dried in the sun. A different kind of green begins, softer, lusher, thriving on the very dampness that troubled everything else. This is the damp corner by the well, and every plant here learned to make the most of ground the rest of the garden could not use at all. The 49th is watercress. It grew directly in the shallow, clear running water at the edge of the well's overflow. Its small, dark green leaves gathered fresh through nearly every month of the year. Since the moving water rarely froze solid even in the hardest winter. Eaten raw in a simple salad, its sharp, peppery bite woke up an otherwise plain meal, and its high freshness, gathered even in the depths of winter, when almost nothing else green could be found anywhere in the garden, made it one of the household's few reliable sources of real vitality through the leanest months of the year. As a remedy, it was chewed for a bleeding gum and eaten regularly as a general blood tonic. Its sharp bite trusted, much like sorrel's, to stir a body grown sluggish through a long, confined winter. Beside the watercress, in the same shallow, clean water, grew a smaller, more delicate plant, its round, fleshy leaves floating just at the surface. The 50th is brooklime. It shared much of watercress's sharp, fresh character, and the two were often gathered together in the same handful, chopped into the same spring salads that gave a household its first real taste of green after a long winter. Its main household reputation was as a mild remedy for scurvy, the creeping weakness and bleeding gums that came from months without fresh food, a danger every rural family understood all too well by the end of a hard winter, and the fresh, damp ground by the well meant a family could gather it even when frost still lay thick on every other bed in the garden. Further from the water's edge, where the ground stayed merely moist rather than truly wet, grew a tall, soft-leaved plant with pale pink flowers gathered thickly up a stout stem. The 51st is marshmallow. Its thick, mucilaginous root, dug in autumn, and either dried for winter use or occasionally boiled down with a little honey into a soft, soothing sweet, was the true treasure of the plant, a gentle, coating remedy for a raw, irritated throat or an uneasy, inflamed stomach, given to the youngest and most delicate members of the household without a moment's hesitation. Its soft, downy leaves, though less celebrated than the root, were sometimes added to a poultice for a sore or inflamed patch of skin, adding their own soothing quality to whatever other plant the poultice was built around. The plant thrived in exactly the damp, marshy ground that so much of the rest of the garden struggled with, one more small proof that nothing in a well-kept cottage plot ever truly went to waste. Beside the marshmallow, tall and frothy, its clusters of small cream flowers giving off a sweet, faintly medicinal scent on a warm summer evening, grew a plant whose very name in later centuries would come to describe an entire family of remedies. The 52nd is meadowsweet. Its flowers were strewn on the floor of the cottage on high days and feast days for their sweet, almond-like scent, and a few were sometimes dropped into a barrel of home-brewed mead or small beer to flavor it, a use so common that some believe the plant's very name grew from meadwort, the wort or herb used to flavor mead, rather than from any meadow at all. As a remedy, its flowers and leaves were steeped into a tea for a fever, a headache, and the aching joints of rheumatism, a gentle, cooling remedy whose active goodness would, many centuries later, give scientists studying it the very compound from which the first mild pain-relieving medicines were eventually made. Beside the meadowsweet, low and spreading, its square stems and cool, sharp-scented leaves thriving in the constant dampness, grew a herb closely related to the spearmint back in the pot. Herb bed, but sharper, cooler, and altogether more medicinal in character. The 53rd is peppermint. Its intense, cooling bite made it a favorite for a heavier, more troubled stomach than gentle spearmint was suited to, a strong tea taken after a rich meal that had sat badly, or sipped slowly through the worst of a bad headache. Its sharp, penetrating scent also found its way into the household's simple remedies for a blocked, congested chest. The crushed fresh leaves held close to the nose to help clear a stuffy head, a small, immediate comfort on a day when illness made even breathing feel like hard work. Nearby, its enormous, umbrella-like leaves, shading a wide patch of damp ground almost entirely on their own, grew one of the strangest-looking plants in the whole garden. The 54th is butterbur. Its leaves grew so large, some wider across than a cottage door, that country families genuinely used them, in a pinch, to wrap and carry a pat of fresh butter home from market on a hot day, keeping it cool and fresh far better than any cloth could manage, a practical use so charmingly literal that it gave the plant its common name. Its thick underground stem, dug and prepared with care, was used sparingly as a remedy for a bad headache and for the wheezing, labored breath of a stubborn chest complaint, though it was treated with more caution than most of its damp corner neighbors, used only occasionally and never in any great quantity. And last, in the damp corner by the well, low and unassuming, its small pale flowers easily lost among taller, showier neighbors, grew a plant whose reputation, though quieter than most, was nonetheless well known to every careful cottage healer. The 55th is figwort. Its knotted, somewhat swollen root gave the plant its old name, since the swellings were once thought, by the ancient logic, that a plant's shape often signaled its use, to signal a remedy for the very swellings and glandular troubles it was in fact traditionally used to treat. A poultice of its bruised leaves was laid over minor wounds and stubborn skin troubles that resisted the garden's gentler remedies. And though it was never among the most celebrated plants of the whole cottage plot, a family that knew it well kept a patch of it deliberately in the dampest, least favored corner of the whole garden, exactly the ground where so many of its damp-loving neighbors also chose to grow. From the wet, shaded ground by the well, let your breathing settle into the same slow rhythm as this whole unhurried walk. In gently, out slowly, no need to keep pace with anything but your own tiredness. The path climbs gently upward again, and the soil turns dry and pale and stony, warmed all day long by a long, sun-facing wall, where an entirely different kind of plant was waiting for us, patient, undemanding, and glad of the sun. This is the sunny bank along the wall, and every plant that grew here would, to modern eyes passing quickly by, look like nothing more than a weed. The cottage family who tended this garden knew better. They knew that a weed was simply a plant whose usefulness nobody had bothered to learn, and on this bank they had learned every single one. The 56 is Sesty John's wort. Its small bright yellow, 5-petaled flowers opened fully around midsummer, close enough to the feast of St. John that the plant took its common name directly from the date. And when its petals were held up to the light, Tiny translucent dots could be seen scattered across them, like 100 small pinpricks, which country folk once believed to be marks left by the devil himself, unable to bear the plant's holy power. Steeped slowly in oil until the whole preparation turned a deep, unmistakable red, it made a salve trusted across the whole countryside for burns, bruises, and the raw, nerve-deep pain of a bad cut. Rubbed gently onto the injured place until the discomfort eased. A weaker tea of the same flowers was given for a low, heavy mood that sometimes settled over a household through the darkest, shortest days of winter. A use so old that later centuries would find real substance behind it. Beside the St. John's wort, low and feathery-leaved, with flat white flower heads standing steady even in a stiff summer wind, grew a plant whose name remembers an ancient hero. The 57th is yarrow. Its old name comes from Achilles, the warrior of ancient legend, said to have carried it onto the battlefield to staunch his soldiers' wounds and cottage households, with far humbler wars of their own. Farm accidents and kitchen cuts kept the same trust in its power to stop a bleeding wound. The fresh, feathery leaves pressed directly onto a cut until the bleeding slowed and finally stopped. A tea made from its flowers was also given for a fever, taken warm to bring on a gentle sweat that was believed, correctly in many cases, to help break the fever's grip. It grew so readily along roadsides, field edges, and sunny banks everywhere that a family never had to travel far to find it exactly when it was needed most. Low and unassuming among the taller yarrow, its small, hooded purple flowers rising from a mat of dark green leaves, grew a plant whose very name promised more than almost any other in the whole garden. The 58th is self-heal. Its old country reputation held it to be a remedy for nearly anything. A bruised leaf pressed onto a small wound. A tea made from the whole flowering plant, taken for a sore throat or a general run-down feeling that resisted every other cure the household possessed. It grew low and close to the ground, easily overlooked among taller, showier neighbors, and perhaps for that very reason it earned a reputation, quiet but deeply held, as the plant that healed itself and, by extension, healed whoever gathered it too. Spreading in a low, broad mat wherever the ground had been trodden hardest, its wide, ribbed leaves lying almost flat against the soil, grew a plant that thrived precisely where nothing else could survive at all. The 59th is plantain. It grew thickest exactly along the busiest paths of the whole garden, so thick and so reliable that its old country name, waybread, remembers the well-worn roads and paths where it was always, without fail, to be found. A fresh leaf, crushed or simply chewed a moment to soften it, was pressed directly onto a nettle sting, an insect bite, or a small scrape, bringing quick, reliable relief that every cottage child eventually learned to find for themselves without needing to ask a grown-up at all. Its seeds, though a far smaller part of its reputation, were sometimes gathered and used in a soothing preparation for a troubled stomach, one more quiet use hiding inside a plant so common it was very nearly invisible. Scattered across the whole bank in cheerful, careless profusion, its small white-petaled, yellow-scented flowers opening wide with the morning sun and closing again by evening, grew perhaps the most familiar flower of the entire garden. The 60th is daisy. Children strung its short stems into chains through long summer afternoons, a simple, endless amusement that needed nothing more than patience and small fingers, and its old country name, Day's Eye, remembers the way its flower opens with the daylight and closes again as the light fades. As a remedy, its leaves and flowers were bruised into a mild ointment for small bruises and minor wounds, gentle enough that even the youngest child, already familiar with the flower from an afternoon of chain making, could be given a little of it without a moment's worry. Beside the daisies, its bright yellow flowers turning later in the season to the familiar drifting seed head every child has ever blown apart with a single wish, grew the sunny bank's most persistent and most useful resident of all. The 61st is dandelion. Its young leaves, bitter but genuinely nourishing, were gathered in early spring and added to a salad or a pottage, a welcome burst of fresh green after a winter of stored, preserved food, and its roasted, ground root, though never quite the same as a true import of coffee, made a warming, bitter drink the family could afford when the real thing lay far beyond their means. As a remedy, its whole plant was valued as a gentle, reliable tonic for the liver and the kidneys, a tea taken through the early weeks of spring to cleanse and renew a body grown heavy through a long, confined winter, and its old French name, meaning lion's tooth for the jagged shape of its leaves, traveled into English essentially unchanged, and has stayed with it ever since. And last, on the sunny bank, low and delicate, its tiny four-petaled flowers a bright, clear blue that seemed almost too vivid for so small a plant, grew a herb whose gentle presence was easy to overlook entirely. The 62nd is speedwell. Its small flowers dotted the bank in early summer, like scattered fragments of clear sky fallen to the ground, and its old country name wished a swift recovery to anyone who received it, a small gift once pressed into the hand of a traveler setting out on a journey, or of someone recovering slowly from a long illness. A mild tea made from its leaves was given for a persistent cough and a general weariness, gentle enough, like so many of the plants on this particular bank, to be trusted without much worry at all. One more small, blue-eyed kindness growing quietly where the wall held the last of the day's warmth. Beyond the sunny bank, the ground rises just slightly, enough to catch the last of the afternoon light, a little longer than the rest of the plot, and here, in the one corner given over entirely to trees, the family kept its small orchard. This is the orchard corner, only a handful of trees, never more than the family could tend and harvest themselves, but each one earning its place through fruit that fed the household and medicine that quietly followed behind it. The 63rd is apple. A single old tree, gnarled and generous, gave the household fruit enough for eating fresh through the autumn, storing through the winter in a cool, dry loft, and pressing, when there was fruit to spare, into a rough cider that kept far longer than the fresh apples themselves ever could. Beyond simple nourishment, a baked apple, soft and warm, was given to someone with a weak or troubled stomach as one of the gentlest foods the whole garden could offer, and the old country saying that an apple eaten daily kept the physician away carried, even in a household that could rarely have afforded a physician's visit anyway, a real and lasting grain of everyday truth. Beside the apple, smaller and more twisted, its fruit hard and strongly perfumed, even while still green on the branch, grew a tree whose fruit was never eaten raw at all. The 64th is quince, left on the branch until the very last of the season. Its hard yellow fruit finally softened enough, after slow cooking with a little honey, to become a thick, fragrant preserve, treasured through the whole of the following winter for its rich, almost floral sweetness. As a remedy, the same slow cooked preparation, or a plain tea made from its seeds, was given for a troubled, loose stomach. Its naturally astringent, binding quality trusted to settle a digestion that plainer foods could not seem to calm. Beside the quince, an even smaller, hardier tree, its fruit strange and hard and almost inedible until frost or careful storage had worked its slow transformation, grew a tree many modern gardens have entirely forgotten. The 65th is medlar. Its odd, brown, rather homely fruit had to be left, sometimes on a shelf in the cool of the larder, rather than on the tree itself, until it softened and browned into something sweet enough to eat. A patient, unhurried process that suited the whole slow rhythm of the cottage garden perfectly. Once softened, it was eaten as a genuine treat late in the season, when almost every other fruit had long since gone, and its firming, binding character made it, much like the quince beside it, a useful food for settling a stomach that other richer foods had upset. At the edge of the orchard, closer to the hedge than to the other trees, its clusters of small white flowers giving way in autumn to bright, vivid red berries, grew a slender tree the family valued as much for protection as for food. The 66th is rowan. Its bitter berries, only truly palatable after cooking with a good deal of honey into a sharp, tart jelly, was served alongside the household's meat, much as we might serve a cranberry sauce today, cutting cleanly through the richness of a well-earned feast day meal. Beyond the kitchen, a rowan tree was often planted deliberately near the cottage door or gate, on an old and widely held belief that its presence protected the whole household from ill luck and misfortune, a small, living charm standing guard at the very edge of the family's ground. Beneath the rowan, tall and coarse-leaved, its large yellow flowers giving off a scent some found sweet and others found faintly unpleasant, grew a plant whose thick root was, for many households, worth more than nearly anything else in the entire garden. The 67th is elecampane. Its large, deeply buried root was dug in autumn, sliced and dried carefully through the winter, then simmered slowly into a strong, bitter syrup, sweetened as best the household could manage, and given as the single most trusted remedy in the whole cottage plot for a deep, rattling, stubborn cough that refused to loosen its grip through the darkest months of the year. Its old country name, Elfdock, hints at a reputation stretching back further than almost anyone in the household could have explained. A plant whose usefulness had simply been handed down, generation after generation, long after its stranger old meanings had mostly been forgotten. Beside the elecampane, a slender wild tree at the very corner of the orchard, its early spring blossom a soft, generous white against the bare, grey branches of the season, grew a fruit the birds usually claimed before the family ever managed to. The 68th is wild cherry. Its small, tart fruit ripened quickly in early summer, and a family that managed to gather a good basketful before the birds found it first considered themselves fortunate indeed. The fruit eaten fresh or, more often, cooked down with honey into a thin, tart preserve, its bark, less sweet in every sense but no less valued, was steeped into a remedy for a persistent cough, a bitter, astringent tea taken sparingly, but with real confidence in its power to ease a chest that plainer remedies had failed to reach. And last, in the orchard corner, a low, spreading tree whose dark, sweet berries stained the fingers and the mouth of every child who gathered them. Grew a fruit prized above nearly every other in the whole garden. The 69th is mulberry. Its deep purple berries, ripening through late summer, were eaten fresh in such quantity that a family often ate as much standing beneath the tree as they ever carried back to the kitchen, and what did make it home was cooked, when sugar allowed, into a rich, dark preserve unlike anything else the garden produced. As a remedy, a syrup made from the same dark berries was given for a sore throat, its cooling, soothing sweetness a gentler answer to the same complaint that sage, back in the pot, herb bed, treated with rather sharper, more bracing conviction, past the last mulberry-stained fingers of the orchard. We are well over halfway through the whole garden now, though there is truly no need to keep count. The old apple tree, the quince, the medlar, the rowan, all of it stands quietly behind us in the gathering dusk, doing exactly what it has always done, whether anyone is walking past it or not. The garden turns smaller again here, closer to the ground and closer to the house, toward the corner every cottage family, kept especially for its youngest and most precious members. This is the children's corner, a small bed kept close to the kitchen door, planted mostly with seeds rather than leaves, since the small, dry, easily measured seed was often the gentlest and most easily judged form of medicine to give a child too young to explain exactly what was wrong. The 70th is caraway. Its small, ridged, strongly aromatic seeds were baked into a plain seed cake, a simple treat kept for a christening, a harvest supper, or any small family celebration, and the same seeds, chewed slowly after a meal, freshened the breath, and settled a mildly upset stomach for the whole family, young and old alike. Given more specifically to a colicky infant, a very weak infusion of the crushed seed was one of the gentlest and most trusted remedies in the whole garden, warming and mild enough that even the most cautious cottage mother reached for it without hesitation. Beside the caraway, tall and feathery-leaved, its small round seeds ripening to a pale, warm brown by late summer, grew a plant whose seed carried a flavor some found sweet and others found strange in equal measure. The 71st is coriander. Its leaves, used sparingly compared to its seed, added a bright, distinctive freshness to a summer dish, but it was the dried, round seed that earned the plant its steady place in the children's corner, ground fine and mixed into a mild remedy for wind and a fretful, uneasy stomach. Its seeds kept well for a long time once dried, a small practical virtue that meant a family need only gather a modest harvest each year to have enough in store for whatever the following months might bring. Beside the coriander, its fine, delicate leaves, easily mistaken at a glance for its close relatives nearby, grew a plant whose small, strongly flavored seed carried real warmth. The 72nd is cumin. Its seeds, warm and slightly bitter, flavored bread and the heavier stewed dishes of the colder months, and a weak tea made from the crushed seed was given, much like fennel and dill before it, to ease the wind and mild colic that troubled so many infants through their first difficult months of life. It was a less common plant in many cottage gardens than its more familiar seed bed neighbors, and a family that grew it well took a quiet, particular pride in a plant that many of their neighbors had to buy dear at market instead. Beside the cumin, tall and feathery, its small white flower umbels giving way to ridged, strongly aromatic seeds through the whole of late summer, grew a plant whose seed carried the same sweet, familiar scent as fennel, though the two plants were not truly related at all. The 73rd is aniseed. It's distinctly sweet. Licorice-like seeds were chewed plain after a meal to sweeten the breath and settle the stomach, and steeped into a mild tea. They were given to a child troubled by wind or a persistent, dry cough. Gentle enough and pleasant enough in flavor that most children took the remedy far more willingly than most of the sharper, more bitter cures the garden otherwise had to offer. Growing wild at the very edge of the children's corner, its soft yellow flowers nodding on slender stems above a low rosette of crinkled leaves, grew a plant every child in the household could recognize long before they could name half the rest of the garden. The 74th is cowslip. Its flowers, gathered in great fragrant armfuls each spring, were made into a mild wine on the rare occasion the family had sugar enough to spare, and children strung the flower heads, much as they did with daisies, into small chains and simple garlands through the whole of a bright spring afternoon. As a remedy, a tea made from its flowers was given for a restless, overtired child at the end of a long day. A gentle calming draught, trusted to settle small nerves before sleep. And for exactly this reason, in more than one household, it earned the fond and telling name of the sleep flower. And last in the children's corner, low and creeping, its tiny leaves and small purple flowers releasing a sweet, familiar scent the moment a small foot pressed down on them, grew a plant most children in the household knew, as much through their bare feet as through their eyes. The 75th is wild thyme. It carpeted the driest, sunniest patch of ground at the very edge of the bed, and children playing barefoot through a warm summer afternoon released its sweet scent with every step, much the same way the path chamomile did back at the garden gate. Gathered and dried in smaller quantities than its cultivated cousin in the pot herb bed, it was steeped into a mild, pleasant tea for a child's cough, gentle and low-key enough to suit the smallest members of the household perfectly. From the low, scented ground of the children's corner, the path turns back toward the cottage itself, up a few worn stone steps, to a small, cool, north-facing room where the goodwife of the house kept her most carefully dried and stored remedies, set by against the long months when the garden itself lay largely bare. This is the goodwife stillroom shelf, and though nothing grows here now, every jar and bundle on it once stood exactly where we have already walked, or in one of the few corners still ahead of us tonight. The 76th is costmary, also called alicost. Its long, tongue-shaped leaves carried a sweet, minty, faintly bitter scent, and a leaf or two was once dropped into a barrel of home-brewed oil to flavor, and some believed, to help preserve it, a household use so common that the plant's very name still remembers the practice today. Beyond the oil barrel, its dried leaves were sometimes used as a bookmark for the family's single treasured Bible, both to keep the page and to perfume it faintly each time the book was opened. And a mild tea made from the same leaves was taken occasionally for a troubled stomach. Beside the costmary on the stillroom shelf, tied in a small, tightly bound bundle, its silvery grey leaves giving off a sharp, unmistakably bitter scent, sat a herb the household respected rather more cautiously than most. The 77th is wormwood, grown in a modest patch near the vegetable rows, mostly to keep certain garden pests at a respectful distance. It was used medicinally in only the smallest quantities, a very weak infusion given, much like tansy before it, for troublesome intestinal worms, a purpose so directly tied to its very name that no one in the household needed the reason explained to them twice. It was also, in some households, one of the bitter herbs steeped into a tonic wine, taken in small sips to sharpen a poor appetite after a long illness. Though everyone in the family understood that a little of this particular herb went a very long way indeed. Nearby, dried into loose, fragrant bundles that scented the whole small room, its narrow leaves smelling faintly and sweetly of new-mown hay, sat a herb valued above all for its lingering fragrance. The 78th is sweet woodruff. Growing wild in the shadier fringes of the garden, it was gathered and dried specifically for the scent it released once dried, a soft, sweet, hay-like fragrance that grew stronger, rather than weaker, with time, and cottage households tucked whole, dried bundles of it among stored linen and clothing for exactly this reason. A few leaves were also sometimes steeped into a cup of wine on a festive occasion, and a mild tea made from the dried herb was taken on occasion to help settle a restless mind before sleep. One more small, fragrant kindness tucked away on a shelf that held so many of them. Beside the woodruff, its fine, straw-like stems bound into a loose golden bundle, its small yellow flowers long since dried and faded, sat a plant once used for a task that had very little to do with medicine at all. The 79th is lady's bedstraw. Its soft, fine, sweetly scented stems were once used, exactly as its name suggests, to stuff a simple mattress or cradle, since the dried herb kept its pleasant, hay-like fragrance for a long time and was believed, gently but sincerely, to encourage a peaceful, restful sleep for whoever lay upon it. Its yellow flowers, in some districts, were also used to curdle milk in the making of a simple cheese, a small, practical kitchen use tucked quietly alongside its more famous role in the cottage cradle, and a mild tea made from the plant was occasionally given for minor skin troubles. Sitting a little apart from its stillroom neighbors, its dried root giving off a strange, strong scent that some found comforting and others found genuinely unpleasant, sat one of the most powerful remedies the whole household possessed. The 80th is valerian, grown in a shaded, slightly damp corner near the well. Its tall stems and small pink flowers gave little hint of the strength held in its root, dug in autumn and dried slowly and carefully through the winter months. A tea made from the dried root, strong-smelling and rather bitter, was the household's most trusted remedy for a night of genuine, stubborn sleeplessness, kept back generally for the worst nights rather than reached for every evening, since even the Goodwife who kept the stillroom understood that its greatest value lay in being used sparingly and with real respect. Beside the valerian, its papery, cone-shaped clusters dried and hung in a loose bundle from the low stillroom ceiling, sat the produce of a climbing plant grown as much for the family's small beer as for medicine. The 81st is hop, trained up a rough pole or along the side of a shed in a sunny corner of the garden. It produced through late summer the same soft, papery cones used across the whole countryside to flavor and help preserve home brewed beer, a household task nearly every cottage family carried out for itself. Beyond the brewing pot, a small pillow stuffed with the dried hop cones was tucked beneath the head of someone struggling to sleep, its faintly bitter, slightly musky scent trusted much like valerian beside it, to ease a restless mind gently toward rest. And last, on the stillroom shelf, its small, pale lilac flowers long dried and faded, its stiff, slender stems bound into a small, careful bundle, sat a herb whose old reputation reached back further than nearly anything else in the whole garden. The 82nd is vervain. It carried an old and widespread reputation as a sacred, protective herb, gathered in some districts with a small private ritual and kept in the house as a charm against harm of every kind. A reputation so old that its roots reach back through Roman and even earlier tradition, long before it ever found its quiet corner in a medieval cottage garden. Set to more ordinary use, a tea made from its dried leaves and flowers was taken for a headache and for a general, nagging unease that would not quite settle, a mild remedy carrying, for the household that kept it, rather more weight and meaning than its plain appearance would ever suggest to a passing stranger. From the stillroom shelf, the walk turns to one final indoor stop before we return outside, a small, private corner of the same room, kept apart and spoken of, when it was spoken of at all, in a quieter voice than the rest. This is the midwife's corner, and the plants gathered here were kept for the private hours of a woman's life, tended and understood, most often, by the older women of the household and the village, who passed the knowledge down carefully, mother to daughter, long before any of it was ever written in a book. The 83rd is raspberry leaf, gathered from the same bramble scrambling canes that gave the family their late summer berries. Its leaves were dried separately and kept for a tea given to a woman in the final weeks before her confinement, believed across the whole countryside to ease and strengthen the womb in preparation for the work ahead. It was one of the gentlest remedies in the whole corner, mild enough to be taken regularly over many weeks, and its familiar source, the very same bramble every child in the house had scratched their fingers on for berries, made it feel less like a mysterious cure and more like an old, trusted friend. Beside the raspberry leaf, tall and dark-leaved, its small pale flowers gathered in whorls up a square stem, grew a plant whose very name announced its most trusted purpose. The 84th is motherwort. Its bitter leaves were steeped into a tea given to calm the racing heart and unsettled nerves that so often accompanied the later months of a pregnancy, and its old country name, carried across many languages in roughly the same form, remembers this single, central use plainly enough that no explanation was ever really needed. It was a herb spoken of quietly among the women of the household, passed along with a certain gravity, since the trust placed in it was real, and the respect for its strength was real as well. Low and unassuming among its taller neighbors, its small white flowers giving way to a distinctive, heart-shaped, purse-like seed pod, grew a plant named directly for the very pouches it seemed to imitate. The 85th is shepherd's purse. It grew readily in almost any disturbed ground around the cottage, a humble, easily overlooked plant that nonetheless carried a strong, well-known reputation for slowing a heavy bleed, whether from a wound or, more privately, following childbirth. A tea made from the whole flowering plant, given in careful, measured amounts by the same older women who understood exactly how and when it ought to be used. Beside the shepherd's purse, its broad, pleated leaves fanning out low against the ground, tiny greenish flowers rising on a slender stem above them, grew a plant whose very shape gave rise to its gentle name, The 86th is Lady's Mantle. Its leaves held tiny drops of dew long after the rest of the garden had dried in the morning sun, caught in the fine folds of the leaf, exactly like a small pleated cloak. And this dew was once gathered with real care, by those who believed it held a particular purity and power. As a remedy, a tea made from its leaves was given to ease the discomfort of a woman's monthly courses and to help settle the body after childbirth. One of the gentler, steadier presences in the whole midwife's corner, trusted across many generations for exactly this quiet, private purpose. Beside the lady's mantle, tall and silvery leaved, its small yellow flower buds clustered densely along a tough, upright stem, grew a plant whose associations stretched from the battlefield to the birthing room in a single old and curious history. The 87th is Mugwort. Its bitter leaves were burned or bundled and hung to keep away troublesome insects, and travelers once tucked a sprig into their shoes on a long journey, on the old belief that it eased tired, aching feet and warded off exhaustion along the way. Within the midwife's corner it was known, used carefully and only when truly needed, as a herb that could help bring on a delayed birth or a stalled labor, a serious, respected remedy reserved for exactly the moment it was needed and for no other, kept apart from the garden's gentler, everyday cures. And last in the midwife's corner, low and strongly scented, its small purple flowers gathered in tight whorls, grew the single most carefully respected plant in the whole cottage garden. The 88th is Pennyroyal, a member of the same mint family that filled the pot. Herb bed with far gentler cousins, it carried a far stronger, far more serious reputation, used sparingly, and only by those in the household who truly understood it, most often the older midwife of the village, rather than the family itself, and every household that kept it understood, without needing the warning spoken aloud, that this was a plant to be handled with real caution and genuine respect, its strength never to be mistaken for the mildness of the herbs that had filled so much of the garden before it. With the midwife's corner behind us now, quiet and a little more solemn than the rest of the walk, we step back out through the stillroom door into the cool evening air, toward the last few beds the family kept, closer to the gate again, for reasons that had less to do with the pot or the medicine chest than with simple, ordinary comfort. Let us pause here for just a moment at the stillroom door before we finish the walk. If you have already drifted somewhere between the bee border and the midwife's corner, that is exactly as it should be, and there is nothing more required of you. For anyone still walking with me, the evening outside has grown a little later, while we were indoors among the dried bundles and the quiet jars, the light gone from gold to a soft, settled grey, the first few stars beginning to show faintly above the thatch. The rest of the garden waits for us in this gentler light, unhurried, and we will walk the last of it slowly, the way anyone walks toward the end of a long, tiring, satisfying day, with no need at all to hurry the final steps. We come now to the last flower bed the family kept, set close against the inside of the garden wall, nearest the gate we first came in by, planted with almost nothing that fed the pot, or filled the medicine chest for anything urgent. This bed existed for a simpler reason than any we have walked past so far. This is the last bed by the gate, and the household kept it, quite plainly, for comfort alone, for the small, ordinary pleasure of a flower that, asked nothing more of anyone than to be looked at, or smelled, or occasionally, gently, put to a mild and gentle use. The 89th is Sweet Violet, low and unassuming beneath the taller plants around it. Its small, deep purple flowers opened in the earliest, coldest weeks of spring, often before almost anything else in the whole garden had stirred. A small, faithful promise that the long winter really was coming to an end. Its flowers were sometimes candied in sugar, when sugar could be spared, a delicate, fragrant sweet kept for a special occasion, and a syrup made from the same flowers was given, gently, for a child's cough, sweet enough that even the most reluctant small patient rarely complained about taking it. Its leaves, added in modest amounts to a poultice, were also used on minor skin troubles, though it was the flower and its shy, early, fragrant beauty that the whole household truly grew it for. Beside the violet, its pale yellow flowers rising on soft, slightly hairy stems from a low rosette of crinkled leaves, grew a flower that shared the same early spring arrival and much the same gentle, comforting reputation. The 90th is Primrose. It carpeted the shadier fringes of the bed, each spring in soft drifts of pale yellow, and its flowers, like the violets, were sometimes made into a light, fragrant wine on the rare year the family's sugar and patience both allowed for it. As a remedy, a tea made from its flowers and leaves was given for a headache and for the restlessness that so often came with a cold or a mild fever, gentle enough, once again, to be trusted with the youngest and most delicate members of the household, and pretty enough that nobody in the family ever thought of it as merely medicine at all. Trailing low along the base of the wall, its small round leaves and tiny blue flowers spreading in a soft, dense mat wherever the shade and the damp suited it, grew a plant whose old country name remembers the warm hearth rather than the cool garden wall where it actually grew. The 91st is Ground Ivy, also called Alahoof. Its old name, Alahoof, remembers a yews very like Cosmary's back on the Stillroom shelf, a handful of the bruised leaves once used to flavor and help clarify home-brewed ale, long before hops became the household's more common choice for the same purpose. As a remedy, a tea made from its leaves was given for a persistent cough and a troubled chest, and its low, spreading, easygoing nature meant a family never had to go looking for it, since it crept in on its own, quietly, to nearly every shaded, undisturbed corner of the whole garden. Nearby, its small white flowers and finely divided leaves, closely resembling a more welcome relative grown back in the pot herb bed, grew a plant whose reputation among gardeners was, in truth, rather more complicated than most of its neighbors. The 92nd is Ground Elder. It spread so readily and so persistently through any bed it took hold in that most cottage gardeners regarded it as more nuisance than gift, forever creeping back into ground it had supposedly been cleared from the year before. And yet it had been brought to many a garden deliberately in the first place, centuries earlier, precisely because its young leaves, cooked much like spinach, made a mild, pleasant vegetable, and because a poultice of the same leaves was trusted, its old country name goutweed, remembering the purpose plainly, to ease the swollen, aching joints of gout and rheumatism. It was, in its own persistent way, a fitting reminder that even the most unwelcome plant in the whole garden had once been valued enough by somebody to be carried there on purpose. Low against the foot of the wall, its soft, spotted leaves and small clusters of pink and blue flowers thriving in the cool shade the stone provided, grew a plant whose very leaf seemed, to the old herbalist's eye, to announce its own medicinal purpose. The 93rd is lungwort. Its leaves, dappled with pale, silvery spots thought by the old logic of signatures to resemble the surface of a diseased lung, were steeped into a tea given for a chest cold and a stubborn, wheezing cough, a use so directly suggested by the plant's own appearance that its very name in more than one language remembers the same idea. It grew easily and asked for very little beyond the cool, sheltered shade of the garden wall, one more quiet resident of the last bed, content to be noticed only when it was needed. And last in this final bed, low and cheerful, its small flowers a striking mix of purple, yellow, and white all at once on a single tiny bloom, grew a flower whose gentle, old-fashioned name suited its gentle, old-fashioned reputation perfectly. The 94th is heartsease, also called wild pansy. Its small, bright, faintly whimsical flowers bloomed steadily from early spring right through to the first hard frost of autumn. Longer than almost anything else in the whole garden, a small, constant cheerfulness in a bed otherwise given over to the fleeting brightness of early spring alone. As a remedy, a tea made from the whole flowering plant was given for a troubled, restless mind and for the mild skin complaints that so often affected children through a long, dirty summer of outdoor play, and its old country name, a small, hopeful wish for an easier heart, was given to it. Tradition holds, by households who trusted it as much for the comfort of its name as for anything the plant itself could truly do. Past the last heartsease, the tended beds of the garden finally give out altogether, and the ground beyond the last bed by the gate turns rough and untidy, the kind of ground that never saw a spade or a deliberate seed, and yet, as we are about to find, gave the household just as much as any bed they had ever dug and tended by hand. This is the waste ground by the Midden, right at the very back of the plot, where the household's own refuse and ash were piled and left to rot down slowly into the rich, dark soil that so much of the rest of the garden depended on. Nobody planted a single thing here on purpose, and yet this last, humblest corner of the whole homestead turned out to be as generous, in its own rough way, as every carefully tended bed that came before it. The 95th is burdock, its enormous coarse leaves and tall, thistle-like flower heads, bristling with the small hooked burrs that clung so stubbornly to any passing sleeve or dog's coat, grew taller here, in the rich, disturbed ground of the Midden, than almost anywhere else on the whole plot. Its long, deeply buried root, dug carefully with real effort in autumn, was valued as one of the strongest blood-cleansing remedies the household possessed. A tea taken through the changing seasons for stubborn skin troubles and a general sense of sluggish, run-down health. Its bitter strength trusted precisely because the ground it grew from was rich enough to make it so. Scrambling low and untidy among the burdock, its small hooked leaves and stems clinging to anything they touched, grew a plant whose whole manner of growing gave it its common name. The 96th is cleavers. It clung to clothing, to the burdock beside it, to anything at all that brushed against its small, sticky, hooked leaves, earning it country names like Sticky Willy and Goosegrass in equal measure, since geese, as it happened, were particularly fond of eating it. For the household, a tea made from the whole fresh plant was taken as a gentle spring tonic for the lymph and the blood. Much like nettle and dandelion elsewhere in the garden, a mild cleansing remedy gathered easily from ground that had never once needed a moment of deliberate tending. Nearby, tall and coarse-leaved, its small greenish flowers giving way to a deep, tenacious yellow root, grew a plant whose vigorous, weedy growth hid a genuinely valued remedy underground. The 97th is yellow dock. Its long root, dug with real effort from the rich, disturbed soil of the Midden ground, was valued much like burdocks for cleansing and strengthening the blood, and it carried, besides, a real and useful measure of iron, which made a tea of the dried root a particular help to anyone in the household left pale and weak after a long illness or a difficult childbirth. Its broad leaves, though far less prized than the root beneath them, were sometimes used, crushed fresh, to ease the very same nettle stings that grew so thickly nearby, one rough plant offering an answer to another, right there in the same untended corner of ground. Low and unassuming among its taller, rougher neighbors, its small yellow flowers and soft, hairy leaves easily overlooked by anyone not already looking for it, grew a plant whose old reputation for healing wounds ran deep and quiet. The 98th is agrimony. Its tall, slender spikes of small yellow flowers gave way, come late summer, to small bird seed pods not unlike burdock's own, and its leaves, gathered and dried through the growing season, were steeped into a tea trusted for a sore throat and applied as a wash for a slow healing wound that resisted the garden's gentler remedies. It carried, in some old traditions, a reputation as a herb of protection and healing sleep, laid beneath a pillow on the belief, sincerely if quietly held, that it would ease the sleeper through the whole of a troubled or restless night. Beside the agrimony, tall and coarse, its leaves a distinctive blue-green, grown here in the rough Midden ground because it needed exactly the rich, disturbed soil that only such ground could provide, grew a plant whose true value lay not in the pot or the medicine chest at all. The 99th is woad. Its leaves, harvested, fermented, and worked through a long, smelly, and rather involved process the whole village might share between several households, yielded a deep, rich blue dye, the same blue dye once used, in ages long past this cottage's own time, to color cloth and even skin itself. By the time of this particular cottage garden, its dye was used mainly for cloth, a small patch of blue woven into an otherwise plain garment, but its leaves, in smaller measure, were also crushed into a poultice applied to old, stubborn wounds and ulcers, a use quieter and less celebrated than its famous color, but genuinely valued by the households who still remembered it. And so, at the very back of the plot, in the roughest, least regarded corner of the whole garden, we come to the 100th and final plant of the night. The 100th is teasel. Tall and stern-looking, its stiff, spiny stem rising well above the head of anyone standing beside it, topped with a dense, bristling, egg-shaped flower head that dried, come autumn, into a hard, spiky seed head tough enough to be used, in the hands of the village weaver, for raising the soft nap on a length of finished woolen cloth. It grew exactly where nothing else was wanted, in the roughest, poorest ground of the whole homestead, and asked for nothing at all in return, a fitting, quietly stubborn plant to close a walk that began at a small, gentle patch of chamomile by the door and ends, 100 plants later, at a tall, spiny weed growing out of the household's own refuse heap. Its root, less known than its famous seed head, was occasionally steeped into a remedy for stubborn skin troubles, one last small, humble gift from a plant that never once asked to be planted at all. And there, with the teasel standing tall and stubborn behind us in the last of the light, our long walk around this small, ordinary homestead is done. 100 plants walked slowly from a worn path at the door to a rough heap of refuse at the very back of the plot, and not one of them, not a single one, grown for medicine alone. You do not need to remember any of their names now. You never did. But if you would like, before the night closes over completely, we can walk back through the whole garden one more time, very slowly, very softly, the way you might walk through a house at the end of a long day, checking each room only to be sure the fire is banked and the door is latched, not to look closely at anything at all. Think back, if you can, to the gate itself, where we first stood. The low wooden gate, sagging a little on its hing, the path beyond it worn pale and hard by generations of the same tired footsteps coming home. That is where the chamomile grew, low and sweet underfoot, releasing its scent of ripe apples to anyone who simply walked where they needed to walk anyway. The house leek sat above us on the roof the whole time, thick and quiet and waiting, asking nothing, offering its cool juice the moment a small hand reached for it. The stone crop clung to the wall beside it, needing no care at all. The feverfew stood by the door, because nobody had ever told it to leave. The soapwort waited by the wash trough for the family's best linen. The southernwood kept the moths from the winter coats and asked only to be worn once, in a buttonhole, by a young man with somewhere hopeful to be. And the tansy, strong and camphor-scented, kept the flies from the larder and gave the household its Easter pudding, part food and part medicine. Exactly the way everything in this garden always was. From there we came to the small window box beneath the kitchen sill, where the cook kept the herbs she reached for every single day. Parsley, bright and iron-rich. Chives, quick to regrow beneath the scissors. Thyme, fragrant even under frost. Sweet marjoram, warm and sweet for the long cold months. Summer savory, cooked in with the beans to ease a heavy supper. Sorrel, sharp and cooling in the heat of summer. Chervil, delicate enough to be scattered only at the very last moment. All of it small, all of it close to hand, all of it doing two quiet jobs at once, without ever making a fuss about either one. Then the ground grew richer, and we came to the pot, herb bed itself, the largest bed in the whole garden, kept nearest the fire because the family could not do without it. Sage, trusted above almost everything else in the plot. Rosemary, evergreen through the hardest winter, carried at weddings and laid at burials for the very same reason, remembrance. Spearmint, spreading eagerly, gentle enough for anyone in the house. Fennel and dill, both given, drop by careful drop, to a fretful colicky infant through the long, wakeful nights of a child's first months. Lovage, the love herb, tucked half in jest into a hopeful sleeve. And bay laurel, standing quietly at the corner of the bed, evergreen and steady. The dependable elder of the whole herb garden. Past the bay tree, the wash house step, where the family mended its small hurts. Horseradish, sharp enough to bring tears, rubbed onto chilblained fingers on the coldest mornings. Comfrey, knitbone, the single most trusted healing plant in the whole garden, always close at hand for a fall from the hayloft or a wrenched ankle on an uneven path. nettle stinging and generous at once, the great spring tonic of the whole countryside. Angelica, revealed by an angel, or so the old story went, candied sweet for a sick child. Calendula, the poor man's saffron, colouring a plain pottage gold. And woundwort, low and modest, its very name announcing exactly what it was for. Then the bee border, the sunniest strip of the whole plot, kept for the hive as much as for the household. Borage, bright blue and endlessly visited, said to carry courage to whoever drank it. Lemon balm, named for the bee itself, calming a racing heart and a worried mind. Hyssop, once a herb of purification, now a chest remedy for a wheezing cough. Catmint, flattened by every cat within reach, gentled into tea for a fretful infant. Lavender, the most fragrant plant of the whole garden, tucked into linen and sewn into sleep pillows. Wood beatony, sold your coat and buy it, an old rhyme said, and clary sage, clear eye, bathing a tired eye after a long day worked by poor candlelight. Beyond the bees, the vegetable patch, where medicine hid inside the family's daily food. Garlic, a single clove eaten fasting against a whole season of illness. Onion wept over at the chopping board, siruped with honey for a stubborn cough. Leek, feeding the household through the hungriest stretch of winter. Mustard, its fierce warmth spread as a plaster over an aching back. Cabbage, its outer leaves warmed and laid over a sore chest. Turnip, baked slow and sweet with honey for a child who had refused every other cure. And carrot, sweetening a plain pottage and, the old belief held, keeping the eyes strong through a long working life by firelight. Past the vegetables, the tangled hedge and the gate, a wild second garden nobody had ever needed to plant. Elder, giving cordial in spring and syrup in autumn, never burned on the household fire for fear of ill luck. Hawthorn, a living fence, bread and cheese to a hungry child on the way to the fields. Dog rose, its hips gathered in a single busy afternoon and cooked into the household's richest winter store of brightness. Bramble, sweet and thorny, jam when there was sugar to spare. Honeysuckle, filling the evening garden with scent long after the bees had gone quiet. Wild strawberry gone in a single mouthful, far too precious to ever reach the kitchen. And sloe, fierce and sour until the first frost softened it, guarding the edge of the plot with thorns longer than any other. Then the damp corner by the well, where the ground never quite dried. Watercress and brooklime, gathered together even in the depths of winter, sharp and fresh against a long season of stored food. Marshmallow, its soothing root dug in autumn for a raw and irritated throat. Meadowsweet strewn on the floor for feast days, its old goodness later giving science the very compound behind the first gentle pain relieving medicines. Peppermint, cooling a heavy stomach and a bad headache alike. Butterbur, its enormous leaves once wrapping a pat of butter home from market on a hot day. And figwort, quiet and easily missed, its knotted root once thought, by its very shape, to answer the swellings it was used to treat. From the damp ground, the sunny bank along the wall, where every plant that looked like a weed turned out to be nothing of the kind. St. John's wort, its petals marked, folk once believed, by the devil's own frustrated touch, steeped into a red healing oil for burns and bruises. Yarrow, named for an ancient warrior, staunching a bleeding wound in a cottage kitchen, just as it once staunched one on an ancient battlefield. Self-heal, healing itself, and the old households trusted, healing whoever gathered it too. Plantain, waybread growing thickest exactly where the most feet passed, always ready for a sting or a scrape. Daisy, Day's eye, strung into endless chains by small patient fingers. Dandelion, lion's tooth, a gentle spring tonic for a body grown heavy through a long, confined winter. And Speedwell, small and blue as a fallen piece of sky, wishing a swift recovery to anyone who carried it. Then the orchard corner, only a handful of trees, each one earning its place twice over. The old apple tree, its fruit kept the physician away, the saying went, and the saying was not entirely wrong. Quince, hard and strange until slow cooking made it into something rich and fragrant. Medlar, patient beyond almost anything else in the garden, needing to soften on a larder shelf before it was fit to eat at all. Rowan, planted by the door as much for protection as for its bitter, jellied berries. Elecampane elfdock, its bitter root simmered into the single, most trusted syrup for the deepest, most stubborn winter cough. Wild cherry, its fruit claimed by the birds more often than not. And mulberry, staining every child's fingers purple through the whole of a happy, careless summer afternoon. Past the orchard, the children's corner, small remedies for the smallest members of the household. Caraway, baked into a seed cake for a christening or a harvest supper. Coriander and cumin, their seeds ground fine for a fretful, uneasy stomach. Aniseed, sweet enough that even the most reluctant child rarely complained about taking it. Cowslip, the sleep flower, gathered in fragrant armfuls each spring and steeped for an overtired child at the end of a long day. And wild thyme, carpeting warm ground underfoot, releasing its scent to every bare running foot of every summer afternoon. Then indoors, briefly, to the Goodwife stillroom shelf, where the dried stores of the whole growing season waited out the winter. Costmary, tucked as a fragrant bookmark into the family's one treasured Bible. Wormwood, respected and used only sparingly. Sweet woodruff, its hay-like scent growing stronger, not weaker, with time. Lady's bedstraw, stuffed into a simple cradle mattress for a peaceful, restful sleep. Valerian, strong-smelling and strong-acting, kept back for the very worst, most stubborn nights. Hop, trained up a pole for the family's small beer and tucked into a pillow for a restless head. And vervain, ancient and half-sacred, carried as a charm against harm of every kind. And then, spoken of a little more quietly than the rest, the midwife's corner. Raspberry leaf, gentle enough to be taken for many weeks together. Motherwort, calming a racing heart in the later months of waiting. Shepherd's purse, its very shape giving it its gentle name. Lady's mantle, its leaves holding tiny drops of dew long after the rest of the garden had dried in the morning sun. Mugwort, tucked into a traveller's shoe against tired, aching feet, and kept elsewhere for a far more serious purpose. And pennyroyal, the single most carefully respected plant in the whole garden, handled always with real caution and genuine care. Then, closer to the gate again, the last bed the family kept for comfort alone. Sweet violet, opening before almost anything else had stirred from winter. Primrose, carpeting the shade in soft drifts of pale yellow. Ground ivy, alhoof, flavoring the households all long before hops took its place. Ground elder, unwelcome to some gardeners and yet once carried there on purpose for a mild vegetable and a swollen, aching joint. Lungwort, its spotted leaf announcing its own quiet purpose. And heartsease, blooming longer than almost anything else in the garden, its small hopeful name a comfort all on its own. And at the very last, the rough waste ground by the Midden, where nothing at all was ever planted on purpose. Burdock, its long root a strong, bitter tonic for the blood. Cleavers, clinging to every sleeve, a gentle spring cleanser gathered from ground that never needed a moment's tending. Yellow dock, its root rich in the very iron a tired, run-down body needed most. Agrimony, laid beneath a pillow, some believed to ease a troubled night. Woad, once a deep and famous blue dye, its leaves also crushed for a stubborn old wound. And teasel, tall and spiny and utterly unconcerned with being wanted, closing the whole long walk exactly where it should close, at the edge of everything, in the humblest ground of all. You could also, if you like, walk the same garden a different way, not bed by bed but season by season, the way the family who tended it actually experienced it, since no cottager ever saw the whole 100 plants at once the way we have tonight. They saw it unfold slowly, one turning of the year at a time. In the earliest days of spring, before almost anything else had stirred, it was the violet and the prime rose that came first, small and low and faithful, opening in the last cold weeks, when the ground still held its winter hardness. Cowslip followed soon after, gathered in fragrant armfuls for a sleep flower wine, when there was sugar enough to make one. The nettle came up thick and young, and stinging along the damp edge of the wash, house bed, welcomed rather than feared, since its first tender leaves made the richest, most needed greens of the whole year, a spring tonic the whole household drank down gladly after a long winter of salted, stored food. Dandelion and cleavers came with it, gathered together for the very same purpose. A body grown heavy through confinement asking, without anyone needing to explain why, for something fresh and green and slightly bitter. And watercress and brooklime, down by the well, were often the very first truly fresh things a family tasted all year, gathered from water that never quite froze, even through the hardest frost. By early summer, the whole garden had woken properly. The bee border filled with borage and lemon balm, and the first spikes of lavender, and the hum of the hive carried across the whole plot on a still, warm afternoon. Elder came into its cream-colored flower, dipped in batter or steeped into a fragrant cordial, the true, unmistakable mark that summer had properly arrived. The hedge filled in thick and green, hawthorn in blossom, dog roses opening pale and pink along its arching canes. Chamile at the door released its apple scent with every passing footstep, and wild strawberries, small and impossibly sweet, vanished from the hedge bottom almost as soon as they ripened, gone before they ever reached the kitchen at all. High summer brought the heaviest harvest of the whole year, and the garden gave almost more than the family could gather in a single day. Sage and rosemary and thyme filled the pot, herb bed with their steady, familiar scent. The vegetable patch swelled with cabbage and turnip, and the first young carrots. Fennel and dill went to seed, their small ridged treasures gathered and dried for the year ahead. Yarrow and St. John's wort stood tall along the sunny bank, and meadowsweet filled the damp corner by the well with its sweet, frothy, almond-scented flower heads. This was the season of the longest working days, and for exactly that reason, the season the garden's remedies were needed least, since a body busy and sun-warmed and well-fed rarely needed much healing at all. Then autumn came, slower and quieter, and the garden turned from giving fresh things to giving stored ones. The elder that had flowered so generously in spring now hung heavy with dark berries, cooked down into the syrup that would carry the household through the coming coughs and colds. The dog rose, gave its hips, gathered in a single busy afternoon, before the birds could claim them all. Hawthorn gave its haws, blackthorn its sour sloes, softened at last by the first hard frost. In the orchard, apples were pressed and stored, quinces and medlars set aside to soften slowly on a cool shelf, and elecampane's thick root was dug and sliced and laid out to dry against the winter's worst coughs. Burdock and yellow dock, in the rough ground by the Midden, gave up their long roots for the same purpose, dug with real effort from soil that had never once been asked for anything before. This was the season of digging and drying and storing, the Goodwife stillroom shelf filling steadily, jar by jar, bundle by bundle, against the months ahead when the garden itself would give almost nothing at all. And then winter, when the whole visible garden seemed to disappear, bare earth and bare branches and frost on the low stone wall, and yet the household was never truly without its plants, not for a single week of the coldest season. The stillroom shelf carried them through elderberry syrup and dried elecampane root, dried sage and dried thyme. The hop pillow and the valerian root kept back for the very worst, most sleepless nights. Cabbage salted down in autumn, and turnip left in the ground until the frost grew too hard to dig through, still fed the family a plain green vegetable when nothing fresh remained. House leek sat on the roof exactly as it had all year, unbothered by the cold, ready the moment a chilblained finger needed it. And rosemary, alone among nearly everything else in the whole garden, kept a little of its dark green color straight through the frost, a small, steady, evergreen comfort on the greyest days of the whole year. Proof, if anyone in the household needed proof, that the garden had never really stopped working at all, even when it looked, to a passing stranger, entirely bare and entirely still. That is the other shape of this same garden then. Not 15 beds walked once, from the door to the Midden, but one long slow wheel, turning and turning, giving something different in every season, and never once, in all the years a family tended it, giving nothing at all. That is the whole garden. 100 plants, and not one of them grown for medicine and medicine alone. Every single one first fed a family, or clothed them, or washed their linen, or scented their sleep, or kept the flies from their larder, and the moths from their coats, and only afterward, quietly, without any ceremony at all, did it become a cure. There was no physician's fee in any of this. There was no monastery's careful Latin record, no walled garden behind iron railings, no lord's gardener answering to anyone but the weather and the season. There was only a family, and a small patch of ground around their door, and a long, unbroken chain of ordinary women and men who noticed, generation after generation, which plant eased which trouble, and who passed that noticing on, mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter, without ever once needing to write a word of it down. That is what has stayed with this particular garden, more than almost any other kind of garden we could have visited tonight. Not grandness, not learning, in the way a physician or a monk might have understood learning, just attention. A whole household paying close, patient attention to the small green world growing right outside their own door, for so many centuries in a row that the knowledge simply became part of the air of the place, breathed in, without anyone quite noticing they were learning it at all. A child grew up watching a grandmother reach, without hesitation, for exactly the right leaf, exactly the right root exactly the right flower, for exactly the right small trouble. And by the time the child had children of their own, the same sure, unhurried hand had somehow become their own hand too. There is something in that slow, quiet passing down of knowledge that feels, I think, very close to the whole point of a night like tonight. Nothing here was ever meant to be memorized in a hurry. Nothing here was ever meant to be understood all at once. It was simply meant to be walked through, again and again, season after season, year after year, until it settled so deeply into a person that they no longer had to think about it at all. Perhaps that is a small, gentle way to think about sleep itself. Not something to be achieved or accomplished, not something to chase or hurry toward, but something that arrives quietly, on its own patient schedule, the way the cottage garden's whole slow calendar arrived, one plant at a time, one season folding gently into the next. There is one more small thing worth sitting with, before we let the garden rest. So many of these 100 plants were understood by the people who grew them, through nothing more than close and patient looking. The old herbalists called it the doctrine of signatures, the belief that a plant's own shape, its color, the very way it grew, quietly announced the trouble it was meant to ease. Lungwort's spotted leaf, resembling the surface of a troubled chest. Figwort's swollen root, seeming to promise an answer to a swollen gland. Houseleek, thick and moist and cool, sitting stubbornly through fire and frost alike on the very roof, meant to shelter the family beneath it. Whether or not any of that was ever truly the reason a plant worked, it tells us something gentler and perhaps more lasting than the medicine itself, which is simply how closely this family looked at the world around them. Nothing in the cottage garden was ever glanced at once and forgotten. Everything was watched, season after season, leaf by leaf, until its whole quiet character had been learned by heart. Much of what was learned that way belonged, in this particular garden, to the women of the household more than to anyone else. It was the Goodwife who kept the stillroom shelf, who decided which bundle to reach for on a feverish night, who taught her daughter, almost without either of them noticing the teaching was even happening, which leaf eased a headache and which root eased a birth. It was the older women of the village, gathered quietly in the midwife's corner of this same story, who carried the harder, more serious knowledge, pennyroyal and mugwort and shepherd's purse, knowledge held with real gravity and passed on only when it was truly needed. None of it was written in any book a cottage family owned, because most cottage families owned no books at all. It lived instead in hands and in memory, in the particular way a grandmother's fingers moved when she pinched a chamomile flower from its stem, in the exact tone of voice a mother used when she told a child which berries in the hedge were sweet and which were best left alone. That kind of knowledge does not announce itself. It simply gets handed on, quietly, the way warmth gets handed from one banked fire to the next log laid carefully upon it. And it is worth remembering, too, one more time, just how different this particular garden was from the grander gardens we might have visited instead. No monastery infirmera ever walked these beds with a Latin herbal tucked under one arm. No physician ever prescribed from behind these low stone walls, and no lord's gardener ever answered to anyone here but the family itself. This was medicine practiced by people with almost nothing. Medicine that could not afford to be separate from the eating and the washing and the ordinary keeping of a home, medicine that had to earn its keep twice over in every single bed, or it simply would not have been grown at all. There is a particular kind of dignity in that, I think, not the dignity of learning or wealth or fine-walled gardens, but the plainer, sturdier dignity of people who looked after each other and after themselves with whatever grew, patiently and without complaint, right outside their own door. There is an old word worth sitting with for a moment before we close the gate for good. Herbalists of this period sometimes called a plant grown and used this way, close to home, gathered by the same hands that ate from it and slept beside it, a simple, not simple in the sense of being unremarkable, but simple in an older, gentler sense, meaning whole, meaning unmixed, meaning exactly what it appeared to be and nothing more. A cottage garden like this one was, in the truest sense, a garden of simples, a collection of plain, honest, single ingredients, each one doing its own small, unglamorous work, never dressed up, never disguised, never claiming to be more than it actually was. There is something worth carrying with you into sleep in that idea alone. The notion that the most trustworthy kind of help is very often the plainest, closest, least dramatic kind, the kind that has simply been growing quietly outside your own door the whole time, waiting to be noticed. Many of these same simples, if you went looking tonight or tomorrow or any ordinary afternoon of the coming week, are almost certainly still growing somewhere near, wherever you happen to be resting. Dandelion still pushes up through the cracks of city pavements and the edges of quiet suburban lawns. Nettle still colonizes the neglected corner of nearly every overgrown verge and abandoned patch of ground. Chamomile still seeds itself along footpaths, plantain still grows thick wherever feet pass most often, and elder still stands, largely unnoticed, at the edge of parks and railway lines and forgotten scraps of waste ground in more places than most people ever think to look. The great walled Physic gardens of the old world have mostly become museums now, carefully tended for visitors, rather than for anyone's actual medicine chest, and the castles that once kept their own private herb. Gardens have mostly crumbled or been turned into something else entirely. But the cottage garden, in its own scattered, unglamorous, ordinary way, never really disappeared at all. It simply stopped being tended on purpose and quietly kept growing anyway, the way it had always half grown on its own, even when someone was tending it. Perhaps that is the last small thought worth carrying with you tonight, as the whole garden settles into darkness behind us. Nothing here ever depended on grandness to survive. Not the walled bed, not the noble patron, not even, in the end, the deliberate hand of the gardener. It depended only on attention, patiently given, generation after generation, by people who had very little else to give, and on the quiet, stubborn persistence of the plants themselves, which have never really needed our permission to keep growing at all. Before we finally let it rest, spare one last thought, if you will, not for the plants themselves, but for the plain, well-worn objects that carried them from the garden to the pot to the medicine cup, since a cottage garden was never really tended with the hands alone. A wooden trug, its handle smoothed pale and shiny by years of the same gripping fingers, carried the day's gathering from bed to bed. Chamomile flowers in one corner, a bundle of sage in another, never quite washed fully clean of the last herb it had carried before this one. A small stone mortar, chipped at one edge from long use, sat always within reach on the stillroom shelf, ready to crush a handful of dried seed or a knot of bitter root into something the body could actually take. A row of earthenware jars, unglazed and faintly porous, kept the Drace stores, tansy and wormwood and dried elderflower, each one stoppered with a twist of cloth rather than any proper lid, since a proper lid was one more expense a cottage family rarely needed and rarely could spare. Up in the rafters, where the smoke from the fire rose and thinned before finding its way out through the thatch, whole bundles of drying herbs hung upside down in loose, informal rows. Lavender beside rosemary beside a fat, fragrant knot of sweet woodruff, turning slowly from green to grey-brown as the weeks passed, filling the whole low room with a scent no single herb could have made alone. A shallow willow basket, set on its edge near the door, held whatever had been gathered most recently and not yet sorted, a tangle of nettle tops and dandelion leaves, and a few unclaimed sprigs of parsley, waiting for a spare half hour that might not come until the following evening. And by the wash trough, a plain wooden bucket, its sides stained faintly green from years of crushed soapwood, sat exactly where it had always sat, exactly where it would sit again tomorrow. None of these objects were remarkable to look at, any more than the plants themselves were remarkable to look at. They were simply worn smooth by use, the way a favorite chair grows smooth under a much-loved cushion, the way a doorstep grows shallow and rounded under generations of the same feet crossing it. And perhaps that, in the end, is the truest description of the whole cottage garden we have walked through tonight. Not grand, not rare, not written up in any physician's careful book, just used gently and constantly for so many years in a row that its usefulness became simply part of the shape of an ordinary life. The way the wooden trug fit an ordinary hand, the way the worn path fit an ordinary tired footstep coming home. It is worth saying, too, quietly and without any hurry, that a great deal of this knowledge very nearly disappeared altogether. As the centuries turned, and cottages gave way to different kinds of houses, and village life gave way to different kinds of life, fewer and fewer people kept a stillroom shelf of their own. Fewer grandmothers had a granddaughter close enough at hand to pass the old habits on to. And much of what a family like ours tonight would have known as simply, unremarkably true slipped quietly out of everyday memory. Recipes that had once been common enough to need no writing down at all were, by the time anyone thought to write them down, already half forgotten, remembered only in fragments, a name here, a use there, a half-remembered rhyme about Beatony or a half-remembered warning about pennyroyal, with the fuller picture around them gone soft and uncertain. And yet none of it vanished completely. Old herbals, written by careful, curious hands in exactly the centuries this cottage garden belonged to, survived in libraries and church collections long after the gardens themselves had been ploughed under or built over. Village names held on to fragments of it too, a lane called after an old dye plant, a field called after a healing well, a surname here and there that once simply meant the family who kept the herb garden for the whole village. And in recent years, in gardens not so very different in spirit from the one we have walked tonight, though certainly different in every other way, people have begun turning back towards some of these same plants, growing chamomile and lavender and calendula along their own paths and window boxes, not always knowing the full old history behind them, but drawn, all the same, to something plain and unhurried and rooted, something that asks to be tended slowly rather than solved quickly. It is a small, quiet kind of continuity, stretched thin across a great many centuries, but a continuity all the same. And there is something rather comforting in knowing that the thread, however faint in places, was never actually cut. None of that needs to matter to you tonight, of course. You do not need to remember a single plant, a single use, a single old rhyme, in order for this to have been a good, restful way to spend an evening. The whole point of walking a garden this slowly was never really the walking itself, but the slowness, the willingness to let 100 small, unremarkable things pass by, one at a time, without any hurry to reach the end. If a little of it has stayed with you regardless, the smell of thyme, the shape of a house leek rosette, the small kindness of a cabbage, leaf laid over a sore chest, that is a pleasant enough gift to carry into sleep. And if none of it has stayed with you at all, if the whole garden has already dissolved into something soft and shapeless somewhere behind you, that is exactly as it should be too. So let the garden rest now, the way it always did at the end of a long day. Let the last light fade from the thatch above the door. Let the smoke from the chimney thin to almost nothing, just a pale, faint thread rising into a sky gone fully dark. Let the gate settle on its hinge, closed for the night, the path beyond it empty and quiet, and waiting for the morning. Perhaps, somewhere off toward the low hills at the edge of the fields, a soft rain has begun to fall, the kind of gentle, steady summer rain that asks nothing dramatic of anyone, simply settling over the thatch and the hedge and the sleeping beds of the whole garden alike. It taps very quietly on the broad leaves of the butterbur down by the well. It gathers drop by drop in the pleated folds of the lady's mantle leaves, along the last bed by the gate, exactly the way it always has. It runs in thin, unhurried threads down the woody stems of the rosemary and the sage and settles, cool and soft, into the thirsty ground around the roots of the apple tree. Somewhere in the hedge, a blackbird that had been singing its last few soft notes of the evening falls quiet, tucking itself down snugly out of the weather, and the whole garden, plant by plant, simply lets the rain fall through it, the way it has let every kind of weather fall through it, for as many years as anyone can remember. There is nothing troubling in this rain. It is only the ordinary sound of a summer night, doing exactly what a summer night does, softening the dust on the path, freshening the dry leaves of the sunny bank, filling the air with that particular, mild, earthy scent that rises whenever water meets warm ground after a long dry day. If you can, let that same soft, steady sound settle over you now, wherever you actually are, real rain or imagined rain. It hardly matters which. Let it be simply one more small, unhurried, undemanding thing happening quietly around you while you rest. Somewhere inside that small cottage, a family is settling too. The fire is banked low, a soft orange glow rather than a bright one, just enough to keep the worst of the night's chill away. A pot that simmered all afternoon has been moved to the cooler edge of the hearth, its scent of thyme and onion and something green still hanging faintly in the air. The linen chest is closed, its lavender and southernwood doing their quiet work in the dark. The stillroom shelf sits undisturbed, jar after jar, bundle after bundle, exactly where the goodwife of the house left them. and upstairs, or in the loft, or on a simple pallet drawn close to the last of the fire's warmth, the family is lying down now, one by one. The way families have lain down at the end of the day, for as long as there have been cottages and gardens, and gates that sag a little on their hinges. Picture, if it helps, exactly who is settling in that small dark cottage tonight, since a family like this was never really just one person, but several, each carrying the day's work in their own particular way. The father, who spent the whole afternoon bent over the vegetable patch, is the first to lie down, his hands still faintly smelling of onion and turned earth, a dull, honest ache in his lower back that a rub of comfrey and a little warmed oil has already begun to ease. He does not think about the garden as he closes his eyes. He has walked past every bed of it 1,000 times, and it has become, for him, simply the shape of home, no more remarkable than the door itself or the worn stone step beneath it. The Goodwife lies down last of all, as she nearly always does, since someone in the house has to be the one who checks the fire is truly banked and the still-room door truly latched before the whole household can rest easy. She carries, without ever quite thinking of it as carrying anything, the whole 100 plants we have walked through tonight, which leaf for which trouble, which root for which ache, which flower simply for the pleasure of its scent on a linen chest. She does not need to remember any of it deliberately. It sits in her the way a well-worn path sits in a familiar field, there whether she is looking at it or not, ready the moment it is needed, and otherwise entirely, comfortably forgotten. The children are already asleep, or very nearly, tucked close together for warmth on a simple pallet stuffed with dried ladies' bed straw and a little sweet woodruff, its faint hay-like scent rising softly with every small movement they make. One of them fell asleep, still faintly smelling of wild thyme, having spent the last of the daylight running barefoot along the driest, warmest edge of the garden. Their breathing has already slowed into the easy, even rhythm of a child who has spent a whole day outdoors, and nothing in the room, not the low fire, not the settling of an old timber beam, not even the soft murmur of their parents' voices, is likely to disturb it now. And somewhere near the warmest corner of the hearth, an older woman, a grandmother perhaps, or simply the oldest member of the household still living under this particular roof, has taken, out of long habit rather than any real need, a small pinch of dried chamomile from a jar close at hand, and let it steep a moment in a cup of water still faintly warm from the day's cooking. She does not really need it tonight. She takes it anyway, the way a person returns, at the end of a long day, to a small familiar comfort, simply because it has always been there, because her own mother took the very same cup at the very same hour, in a kitchen very like this one, a great many years before. You may lie down too, if you have not already. Let your own breathing slow to match theirs now, in gently, out slowly, no hurry in it at all, no effort in it at all. Let your shoulders sink a little further into wherever you are resting tonight. Let your hands go loose and heavy, the way a hand goes loose and heavy when it has finally stopped reaching for anything at all. There is nothing left to walk toward tonight, nothing left to reach for. The garden is behind us now, every bed of it. From the worn path at the door to the rough ground by the Midden, and every single one of its 100 small plants, is exactly where it has always been, growing quietly and patiently in the dark, needing nothing at all from you tonight. Not your attention, not your memory, not even your continued company. It will still be there tomorrow morning. It will still be there the next time we come this way together. For now, it only needs to rest quietly, the way you only need to rest, the way the whole tired, sun-warmed, well-tended world only needs, at the end of a long day, to be still for a while. Let the last of the light go. Let the last small sound settle into silence. Let your eyes close now, gently, if they have not closed already, and let them stay closed, heavy and warm and unhurried, for as long as they would like, for the rest of the night if that is what they need. While the family sleeps, the garden does not go entirely still. It simply changes hands, quietly, the way it always has, from the daylight creatures who tended it to the nighttime ones who now move through it instead. If you would like, we can walk it one final time, very briefly, not to learn anything more, but simply to picture it settling, bed by bed into the dark, down by the gate, where the chamomile grows thick and low along the worn path. A hedgehog is making its slow, snuffling way toward the wash house step, unbothered by the house leak watching quietly from the roof above. Along the sunny wall, where the day's heat still lingers faintly in the stone even now, a moth drifts past the last closed flowers of the feverfew, following some scent only it can follow. The bee border has gone fully quiet, the hive settled deep inside its straw skep, the borage and the lavender standing motionless and dark, waiting for the sun and the bees to find them again tomorrow. A single bat traces a soft, looping path above the tall spikes of clary sage, taking whatever small insects the warm evening has drawn up out of the grass. In the vegetable patch, nothing moves at all. The rows of cabbage and turnip and carrots standing in neat, dark, undisturbed lines, exactly as they were left. Out along the hedge, a fox pauses for a moment where the dog rows and the bramble grow thickest, testing the air, then moves on unseen and unhurried, toward whatever quiet business a fox keeps at this hour. Down by the well, in the damp corner where the watercress and the meadowsweet grow, a light mist has begun to gather low over the water, and somewhere close by, a single frog calls once, twice, then falls silent again. On the sunny bank, the yarrow and the St. John's wort have folded themselves inward for the night, waiting patiently for morning light before they open again, and the dandelion's bright yellow heads have closed as tightly as a small, closed, sleeping hand. Even the speedwell, small and blue by daylight, has drawn its tiny petals in, waiting out the dark the same unhurried way everything else in the garden is waiting it out. In the orchard, an owl has taken up its usual place in the old apple tree, silent and watchful, while beneath it, in the deep grass, a single windfall apple sits half hidden, already being visited by whatever small creatures find their own quiet uses for it. The children's corner lies empty and still, its caraway and cowslip and wild thyme resting undisturbed until small bare feet return to it tomorrow. Near the stillroom door, a cat, the very same cat perhaps that flattened the catmint so happily this afternoon, has curled itself into a loose, warm circle right on top of the crushed patch, entirely at peace with the whole arrangement, one ear twitching very faintly whenever the hedgehog's slow snuffling drifts a little too close for comfort. Nearby, the sage and the rosemary and the bay laurel stand exactly as they stood at midday, unbothered, evergreen, keeping their quiet watch over the pot. herb bed the way they keep it through every single night of every single season. And out at the very back of the plot, in the rough waste ground by the Midden, where the burdock and the teasel stand tallest and darkest against the night sky, nothing at all disturbs the quiet, since even the wildest, least tended corner of this whole small homestead has, by this hour, settled fully into rest. Above it all, whether the night is clear or clouded, the same slow sky turns that has turned over this garden every single night since the very first seed was ever pressed into this ground, patient, unhurried, asking nothing of the small green world beneath it, except that it continue quietly to grow. If a little moonlight happens to fall across the whole plot tonight, it will find every bed exactly as we left it, silvered rather than golden now, the thatch pale above the sleeping door, the low stone wall casting its long, familiar shadow across the sunny bank where the yarrow and the dandelion wait for morning. Nothing in the garden minds the change of light. It has worn moonlight as easily as sunlight for as long as it has stood here, and it will wear the grey, softening light of dawn just as easily again, whenever dawn finally chooses to arrive. There is a soft, quiet dark waiting for you now, gentle as a well-worn path, familiar as a garden you have walked 100 times before. Let it hold you. Let it carry you the rest of the way, slowly, the way water carries a fallen leaf downstream without any effort of its own at all. It does not matter, in the end, whether a garden exactly like this one ever grew in exactly the shape we have walked tonight, in exactly this order, behind exactly this particular gate, on exactly this particular patch of ground. Gardens like it grew, in their thousands, behind thousands of small gates very much like this one, each one slightly different, each one shaped by whatever ground its family happened to have, whatever plants a neighbor happened to share a cutting of, whatever small local habit had grown up around a particular well or a particular stretch of hedge. What stayed the same, garden after garden, cottage after cottage, was simply the pattern underneath it all. The pot herb doubling as the cure, the humble plant earning its keep twice over, the quiet, patient attention of people with very little else to rely on but their own eyes and their own hands, and whatever grew, unbothered, right outside their door. If you ever find yourself passing a patch of nettle at the edge of a path, or a wild rose tangled through an old fence, or a low, unassuming clump of self-heal pushing up through a crack in the pavement, you might, if you like, spare it a small, quiet nod of recognition, the way you might nod to an old, half-forgotten acquaintance passed on a street corner. It will not need the nod. It has never needed anyone's attention to keep on being exactly what it is. But there is something pleasant, all the same, in knowing a name, in knowing a little of an old, humble story, in seeing, for just a moment, past the ordinary weed to the quiet, patient, generous plant that a whole different kind of household once could not have done without. For now, though, none of that needs to be carried any further than this. The garden behind us is closed for the night, gate latched, fire banked, every one of its 100 small plants resting exactly where it has always rested, from the chamomile at the door to the teasel at the midden. There is nothing left to notice, nothing left to name, nothing left at all except the soft, slow work of letting go. If it helps, let your next few breaths carry a little of the garden with them. Breathe in slowly and imagine, just faintly, the sweet apple scent of chamomile crushed underfoot on the path. Let the breath out slowly, and let your whole body settle a fraction further into wherever you are lying. Breathe in again, just as slowly, and imagine the clean, sharp scent of lavender drifting from a linen chest, warm and familiar. Let that breath go too, unhurried, with nothing held back. Breathe in once more and picture the warm, resinous smell of rosemary and sage, the very last scent of the whole long day's cooking, still hanging faintly in a low, dim kitchen. And let it go slowly, the way smoke lets go of a dying fire, thinning to nothing, drifting up and out through an old stone chimney into a soft, dark, star-scattered sky. There is nothing more to do now than that. In slowly, out slowly, a small garden scent carried in and released again, over and over, for as long as you would like, each breath a little heavier and a little easier than the one before it. You do not need to count them. You do not need to notice when they slow. They will slow on their own, the way everything in this garden has always found its own quiet pace, the chamomile underfoot, the bees in the border, the slow turning of the whole gentle year, none of it hurried, none of it forced, all of it simply, patiently, arriving exactly when it was ready to arrive. Let your mind wander now, if it wants to, loosely and without direction, unhurried and undirected, back through whatever small pieces of the garden happen to drift past. It does not matter which ones. A gate, a path, a low hum of bees, a warm kitchen window. None of it needs to be held onto. None of it needs to make sense. Let it simply drift, the way the last of the evening's smoke drifts up past a low thatched roof, thinning slowly into the dark, until there is nothing left to follow at all, only the soft, wide, patient quiet of a garden, and a house, and a whole small world, settling gently into sleep. Sleep well. The quiet apothecary will be back soon, with another slow, quiet corner of the old world to walk through together. The gate is closed. The fire is low. The garden is resting, and so now are you. There is nothing more to walk toward, nothing more to name, nothing more to remember. Only the soft dark, and the slow breath, and the whole small, humble garden resting quietly behind you, exactly as it always has, exactly as it always will, whether you are here to walk it or not. Wherever you actually are tonight, whatever room, whatever bed, whatever quiet corner of your own life you happen to be resting in, let this same slow, unhurried feeling settle over you now the way it has settled, bed by bed, plant by plant, gently and completely, over the whole cottage garden we have walked together this evening. There is no gate to latch, no fire to bank, no small chore left waiting for morning. There is only rest, patient and plain and entirely yours, for exactly as long as you need it. Rest now, exactly as you are, without needing to change one single thing about how you are lying or breathing or thinking. Let it all go. Let the last of the evening settle around you like a warm, familiar blanket, and let sleep, patient and unhurried as everything else in this old garden, find you gently in its own good time. There is no hurry in it. There never was. The whole garden we walked tonight grew the way it grew, because nobody ever rushed a single plant of it into being, not the slow, patient comfrey, not the evergreen rosemary, not even the humble teasel at the very back of the plot, and you need not rush yourself toward anything now either. Simply rest. Simply breathe, slowly and easily. Simply let the evening close slowly, the way every evening in this garden has always closed, quietly, without fuss, into a long, dark, restful night. Good night, and rest well.